Clara DeLuca never imagined her husband's funeral would end with a stranger's hand on her shoulder and a single word that destroyed everything. Debt. In the rain-soaked cemetery of Naples, surrounded by mourners who knew nothing of the truth, she learned that her quiet marriage was built on lies, and that the man she buried had gambled with her life. Now, a ruthless crime lord named Victor Romano owns what remains of her world. This is the story of a woman who became collateral, then something far more dangerous. If you enjoy this story, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Now, let's begin. Tumut. The rain fell like punishment over Naples. Clara DeLuca stood at the edge of the open grave, her black dress clinging to her skin, her hands clasped so tightly around the funeral program that the paper had gone soft and shapeless. Around her, mourners clustered beneath umbrellas, their faces blurred by the downpour, their voices a low murmur of condolences she couldn't quite hear. The priest's words washed over her without meaning, just sounds mixing with the drum of rain on wood, on stone, on the fresh earth piled beside the hole where they would lower her husband. Thomas DeLuca. 42 years old, dead of a heart attack in his office downtown, slumped over paperwork that Clara had never been allowed to see. She stared at the casket, polished mahogany, expensive brass handles, a spray of white roses across the top that someone else had chosen because Clara had been too numb to make decisions. 3 days ago, she'd been making dinner when the call came. 3 days ago, she'd had a husband, a life that made sense, a routine that felt safe even if it wasn't exciting. 3 days ago, she'd been planning what to cook for Sunday dinner, wondering if Thomas would actually make it home on time for once. Now she was a widow at 34, standing in the rain, trying to remember the last real conversation they'd had. "We commit this body to the ground," the priest intoned, his voice competing with thunder in the distance. "Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust." Clara watched them lower the casket. The ropes creaked. The wood disappeared into the darkness of the grave. She thought she should feel something more, some overwhelming grief, some collapse of emotion, but there was only numbness and a strange, hollow confusion. Thomas had been distant for months, years maybe. She told herself it was work stress, that he was building something for their future, that the late nights and locked study door meant he was protecting her from boring business details. She'd been so stupid. The mourners began to drift away as the gravediggers approached with their shovels. Clara's mother touched her arm, whispered something about coming back to the house, but Clara shook her head. She needed another moment, just one more moment to figure out how she was supposed to feel about a man who had shared her bed but kept his whole life locked away. The crowd thinned, the rain intensified. Clara stood alone, watching dirt fall onto the casket in heavy, wet clumps. That's when she felt it. A hand, firm and warm, settling on her shoulder with a weight that made her freeze. "Mrs. DeLuca." The voice was low, smooth, accented with something that wasn't quite Italian but carried the music of it. Clara turned and the world seemed to narrow to a single point of focus. The man behind her was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair slicked back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes so dark they looked black in the gray light. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, and he held no umbrella despite the downpour. Rain ran down his face like he didn't notice it, like weather was something that happened to other people. "I'm sorry," Clara said automatically, her voice rusty from disuse. "Do I know you?" His expression didn't change. No sympathy, no warmth, nothing but a calm assessment that made her skin prickle with instinctive unease. "No," he said, "but I knew your husband." Clara waited. When the man said nothing else, just kept looking at her with those unsettling eyes, she pulled her jacket tighter and tried to step away. "Thank you for coming. I should—" His hand remained on her shoulder, not painful, but immovable. "We need to talk," he said. "Jean, about what Thomas owed me." The world tilted. Clara blinked rain from her eyes, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Debt," the man said, and the single word landed like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything Clara thought she understood. "Your husband borrowed a considerable amount of money from me. He made promises about repayment. promises he did not keep. Clara's heart began to pound, a sick, heavy rhythm that made her dizzy. I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas had a good job. We didn't need to borrow. Mrs. DeLuca. The man's voice cut through her stammering with surgical precision. Your husband was in debt to the amount of 300,000 euros. The terms were clear. The timeline was not negotiable. And now he's dead, which creates a problem. 300,000 euros. The number was impossible, absurd. Thomas had been an accountant, careful with money to the point of obsession. He'd refused to let Clara buy a new winter coat last year because the old one was perfectly serviceable. He'd counted every euro that went in and out of their household budget. He'd been a liar. The thought arrived with brutal clarity. He'd been a liar. I don't have that kind of money, Clara said, and hated how small her voice sounded. I don't have any money. Thomas handled everything. I don't even know what's in our accounts. I know. The man released her shoulder and reached into his jacket. For one terrifying second, Clara thought he might pull out a gun, right here in the cemetery with her husband's body still warm in the ground. Instead, he produced a business card, plain white, with embossed black lettering. My name is Victor Romano. Your husband knew exactly who I am and what it means to owe me. Now you need to understand the same thing. Clara took the card with trembling fingers. There was just a name and a phone number, nothing else. I don't understand, she whispered. What do you expect me to do? Victor Romano tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he was mildly interested in solving. Debts don't die with the debtor, Mrs. DeLuca. They transfer. Your husband's obligation is now yours. You have 48 hours to contact me and arrange repayment terms. If you don't, he paused, letting the silence fill with unspoken threat. Well, I think you're intelligent enough to imagine the consequences. He turned and walked away, moving through the rain-soaked cemetery with the confidence of a man who owned every space he occupied. Clara watched him go, her mind screaming with questions she couldn't form into words. A black car waited at the cemetery gates, sleek and expensive, and Victor Romano climbed into the back seat without looking back. The car disappeared into the rain. Clara stood alone beside her husband's grave, holding a business card that felt like a death sentence, and finally, she began to cry. Not for Thomas, not for the marriage that had been a lie, but for herself and for the life that had just been ripped away, and for the terrifying future she could feel closing in like a fist around her throat. The apartment felt like a stranger's home. Clara moved through the rooms in a daze, still wearing her wet funeral clothes, leaving a trail of water on the hardwood floors Thomas had insisted on having refinished last spring. Everything looked the same, the furniture they'd picked out together, the wedding photos on the mantel, the kitchen where she'd made countless dinners for a man who'd eaten them while keeping catastrophic secrets. But it all felt different now. Contaminated. Every object was a potential hiding place for truth. Clara started with the study. Thomas had always kept it locked. Work stuff, he'd say whenever she asked. Boring numbers and client files, you'd fall asleep in 5 minutes. She'd laughed and let it go, respected his space the way you're supposed to respect your spouse's need for privacy. The key was in his nightstand, tucked into a wooden box with his cufflinks and watch. Clara's hand shook as she unlocked the study door and stepped inside. It was meticulously organized. Thomas had been obsessive about order, files arranged alphabetically, pens lined up by color, desk surface clean except for a closed laptop and a leather-bound planner. Clara sat in his chair, still damp from the rain, and opened the first drawer. Bank statements. She recognized their joint account, saw the familiar deposits from Thomas's salary, the withdrawals for mortgage and utilities and groceries. Normal. Expected. Nothing that explained 300,000 euros of debt. But underneath those statements was another set. Different account, different bank, and the numbers. Clara's stomach turned. Deposits of 20,000, 50,000, 80,000 euros coming in from sources labeled only with initials and codes. Withdrawals just as large, sometimes larger, going out to places Clara had never heard of. The balance swung wildly, flush one month, nearly empty the next, then suddenly full again. It read like the accounts of someone living two completely different financial lives. She dug deeper, found folders labeled with years, each one containing more of the same, money flowing in and out in amounts that made no sense for an accountant's salary. Found a notebook filled with Thomas's careful handwriting, columns of numbers and dates and names she didn't recognize. And then, at the bottom of the last drawer, she found the envelope. It was plain manila, unsealed, stuffed with papers that spilled across the desk when Clara dumped them out. Loan agreements, promissory notes, documents with Thomas's signature next to terms that made Clara's blood run cold, interest rates that compounded monthly, collateral listed as personal assets and guarantees, repayment schedules that Thomas had missed, with missed payment penalties that had ballooned the original debts into something monstrous. And on every single document, in elegant script at the bottom, was a signature, Victor Romano. Clara's vision blurred. She pressed her hands against the desk, breathing hard, trying to process what she was seeing. Thomas hadn't just borrowed money. He'd borrowed from someone dangerous, promised things he couldn't deliver, and then, what? Hidden it? Hoped it would go away? Thought he could manage it somehow without ever telling her? The laptop. Clara flipped it open, praying she knew the password. Thomas had been careless about some things, careful about others. She tried his birthday. Wrong. Their anniversary. Wrong. Her birthday. The screen unlocked. Clara navigated to his email, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind reeled. The inbox was full of the usual, work correspondence, spam, newsletters. But when she searched for Victor Romano's name, a separate folder appeared. 37 emails, all marked as read, all hidden from the main inbox. Clara opened the most recent one, dated 3 weeks before Thomas's death. Mr. DeLuca, this is your final warning. The extension period has expired. You were given multiple opportunities to honor your commitment. My patience is not infinite. If the full amount is not transferred by the end of this month, we will be forced to pursue alternative collection methods. I trust you understand what that means. V. Romano. Alternative collection methods. Clara opened another email from 6 months earlier. Thomas, I'm disappointed. You came to me with promises of quick returns, guaranteed investments, inside information that would make us both wealthy. Instead, you've delivered excuses and delays. I don't accept excuses. I don't tolerate delays. You know what I am and what I'm capable of. Don't make me demonstrate it. You have until the end of the quarter. Don't test me. And another, from a year ago, that made Clara's skin crawl. I'm a reasonable man, Thomas. I understand that businesses take time to develop, but my generosity has limits. You've borrowed well beyond your ability to repay through legitimate means. That tells me either you're a fool or you were never planning to repay at all. I don't do business with fools, and I don't forgive thieves. However, I'm willing to offer one more extension, with adjusted terms. We should meet in person to discuss. My associate will contact you with details. Come alone. If you involve anyone else, police, lawyers, even your wife, the offer is void, and the consequences immediate. Remember, I know where you live. I know your routines. I know everything about you. Choose wisely. Clara slammed the laptop shut, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Thomas had known. He'd known for over a year that he was in danger, that they were in danger, and he'd said nothing. Kept going to work, coming home, eating dinner, sleeping beside her, all while 300,000 euros of debt hung over their heads like a guillotine blade. And now it had fallen. Not on him. On her. The business card sat on the desk, white and innocent and terrible. Clara picked it up, ran her thumb over the embossed lettering. Victor Romano. A name that apparently meant something in the kind of world Thomas had secretly inhabited. A world of debts and threats and alternative collection methods. She had 48 hours. Clara looked around the study, at the evidence of her husband's lies, at the paper trail of his betrayal, at the life she'd thought she had evaporating like morning mist. She could go to the police, show them everything, explain that she'd had no knowledge of Thomas's debts, that she was innocent, that Victor Romano's threats constituted extortion or intimidation or something that would make this a legal problem instead of her problem. But even as the thought formed, Clara knew it was fantasy. The police would investigate. They'd ask questions. They'd take time. And Victor Romano had made it very clear he didn't tolerate delays. "I know where you live." The words from the email echoed in her mind. Clara stood up abruptly, moved to the window, pulled the curtain back just enough to see the street below. Nothing unusual, just parked cars and streetlights and the endless rain. But she felt watched now, exposed, like invisible eyes were tracking her every move. Her phone buzzed. Clara nearly screamed. It was her mother. "Are you all right? You left so quickly. Call me when you get home." Clara stared at the message. How could she possibly explain this? How could she tell her mother, her sweet, conventional, church-going mother who'd cried with joy at Clara's wedding, that Thomas had been involved with criminals? That her daughter was now apparently responsible for a debt large enough to buy a house? She couldn't. There was no way to make this make sense to anyone who lived in the normal world. Clara was no longer part of that world. She typed back, "I'm fine. Just need to be alone tonight. I'll call you tomorrow." The lie came easily. Maybe she was more like Thomas than she'd thought. Clara didn't sleep. She spent the night going through every document in Thomas's study, reading every email, trying to piece together what her husband had actually been doing. The picture that emerged was worse than she'd imagined. Thomas had started gambling 2 years ago. Online poker first, then sports betting, then increasingly risky investments in ventures that promised huge returns and delivered nothing. He'd burned through their savings without Clara noticing because he'd been moving money between accounts, creating the illusion of stability while everything crumbled. When the legitimate money ran out, he'd turned to Victor Romano. The first loan had been 50,000 euros. Short-term bridge financing for a guaranteed opportunity. Thomas had promised to repay it within 3 months with interest. He'd missed the deadline. Borrowed more to cover the first loan. Missed that deadline too. The cycle spiraled. Borrow to pay debts, accumulate more debt, borrow again, each loan carrying higher interest rates and more severe penalties. Victor Romano had enabled it all, not out of kindness or belief in Thomas's schemes, but because he understood exactly what he was doing, creating a trap that would eventually spring shut on someone with assets worth claiming. Clara was those assets now. As dawn broke gray and cheerless over Naples, she sat at the kitchen table with coffee she couldn't taste and a decision she couldn't avoid. She could run, pack whatever would fit in a suitcase, take whatever cash she could access, and disappear. Change her name. Start over somewhere Victor Romano couldn't find her. But the emails had made it clear he knew everything, her family, her friends, her routines. Running would put them in danger. And where would she go? She had no money, no connections, no skills for living off the grid. She'd be caught within a week. And then what? What did men like Victor Romano do to people who tried to cheat them? Alternative collection methods. Clara looked at the business card, still sitting on the table where she'd placed it hours ago. She picked up her phone. Put it down. Picked it up again. 48 hours. She had until tomorrow night. Or she could call now, face it now, stop living in this horrible limbo between her old life and whatever came next. Her finger hovered over the numbers on the screen. She pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered. Female, professional, speaking accented English. "Mr. Romano's office?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. "This is Clara De Luca. He told me to call." "One moment, please." "Hold music." Classical, ironically. Clara listened to strings and piano while her heart tried to break through her ribs. Seconds stretched into minutes. She was about to hang up when the music cut off and a different voice came on the line. "Mrs. De Luca." Victor Romano sounded unsurprised, as if he'd known exactly when she would call. "I'm glad you're being sensible." "I saw the documents," Clara said. "The emails. Everything Thomas borrowed from you." "Then you understand the situation." "I understand my husband was a liar and a fool. I understand he made promises he couldn't keep. I understand—" Her voice cracked. She forced it steady. "I understand that you think I'm responsible for his debts. But I don't have 300,000 euros. I don't have anything close to that, so I don't know what you expect me to do." Silence on the other end. Then, "We should discuss this in person, not over the phone." "Why not over the phone?" "Because certain conversations require eye contact, Mrs. De Luca. because I prefer to see the people I do business with, and because you need to understand exactly who you're dealing with." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Clara closed her eyes. "When?" "Tonight, 8 o'clock. My driver will collect you from your apartment. Wear something practical, and come alone." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk without interruption." A pause. "Don't be afraid, Mrs. DeLuca. I'm not a monster, I'm a businessman. We'll simply discuss terms." He hung up before she could respond. Clara sat holding the phone, staring at nothing, feeling the last threads of her old life finally snap. She'd crossed a line by making that call. There was no going back now, no pretending this wasn't happening, no hoping it would somehow resolve itself. At 8 o'clock tonight, she would meet Victor Romano. And whatever happened after that, whatever terms he had in mind, would determine whether she survived this or became another casualty of her husband's catastrophic mistakes. The day passed in a blur of pointless activity. Clara called her mother and lied about meeting with lawyers, called Thomas's employer and lied about needing time to handle estate matters, called the funeral home and confirmed arrangements she barely remembered making. Everyone was sympathetic, patient, understanding. No one knew that beneath her grief was a growing terror that made her hands shake every time she thought about the evening ahead. At 7:30, she dressed carefully. Victor had said practical, so she chose dark jeans, a simple sweater, flat shoes, pulled her hair back in a ponytail, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she stared at for a long moment before deciding to leave it on. Not out of sentiment for Thomas, that had died somewhere in his study last night, but because taking it off felt like admitting defeat before the fight had even started. At 7:55, she stood by the window and watched the street. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black Mercedes pulled up outside her building. Claire's breath caught. It was the same car from the cemetery. Sleek, expensive, with tinted windows that revealed nothing. As she watched, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that marked him as security rather than simple chauffeur. He looked up at her window as if he knew exactly where to look, then gestured toward the car. No more delays. No more pretending. Clara grabbed her jacket and went downstairs. The driver opened the back door without speaking. Clara climbed in, and the door shut behind her with a heavy, final sound. The interior smelled like leather and something else. Cologne, maybe, or just money. The seats were butter soft. The windows were so dark she could barely see outside. The driver got back in and pulled away from the curb. Clara sat rigid, hands clasped in her lap, watching the city slide past in shadows and streetlight. They drove through neighborhoods she recognized, then ones she didn't, heading away from the center of Naples toward the hills where the wealthy lived behind gates and walls. 20 minutes later, they turned onto a private road. Clara's stomach tightened. The road wound upward through manicured grounds, past security gates that opened automatically, past cameras she could see mounted on every corner. At the top of the hill sat a villa, massive, modern, all glass and white stone, lit from within like a beacon, or a fortress. The car stopped at the main entrance. The driver opened her door. "This way, Mrs. DeLuca." Clara climbed out on shaking legs. Up close, the villa was even more intimidating, 3 stories of wealth and power, designed to impress and overwhelm. She followed the driver through doors that opened at their approach, into a foyer with marble floors and a ceiling that soared 2 stories high. "Mr. Romano is expecting you," the driver said, gesturing toward a hallway. "First door on your right." Then he was gone, and Clara was alone. She walked slowly down the hallway, her footsteps echoing. The first door on the right was open, light spilled out. Clara stopped in the doorway, took a breath, and stepped inside. It was an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one wall overlooking the city lights below, bookshelves on another, a massive desk in the center. And behind the desk, standing with a glass of whiskey in his hand, was Victor Romano. He'd changed since the cemetery. Now he wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie, no jacket. Somehow the casual look made him more intimidating rather than less, like he didn't need formal armor to command respect. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. "Thank you for coming." As if she'd had a choice. Clara sat. Victor remained standing, studying her over the rim of his glass. Up close, in good light, She could see details she'd missed in the rain, a thin scar along his jawline, gray threaded through his dark hair at the temples, eyes that weren't quite black, but deepest brown. He was handsome in the way that dangerous things often were, beautiful and deadly in the same breath. "Would you like a drink?" he asked. "No." Claire's voice came out stronger than she felt. "I'd like to know what you want from me." Victor smiled slightly. "Direct. I appreciate that." He moved around the desk, sat on the edge of it rather than in his chair, close enough that Clara had to resist the urge to lean back. "Your husband owed me 300,000 euros, plus interest, which at this point brings the total to roughly 380,000. I assume you don't have that in a checking account somewhere?" "No." "Do you have any assets, property, investments, inheritance?" "The apartment. It's in both our names. There might be equity, but I don't know how much." "Not enough." Victor took a sip of whiskey. "I've already reviewed your financial situation, Mrs. DeLuca. The apartment has a mortgage. Your joint accounts are nearly empty. Thomas drained them before he died. You have a car worth perhaps 10,000. No other assets of significance. The math doesn't work." Clara felt sick. "Then what do you want? I can't give you what I don't have." "No. But you can work for it." The words hung in the air between them. Clara stared at Victor, trying to process what he'd just said. "Work for it? What does that mean?" Victor set down his glass and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bringing his face level with hers. "I run a business, Mrs. DeLuca, a large, complex business with many moving parts. I need people I can trust, people who are smart, discreet, and motivated to succeed. You need to repay a debt. I propose an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "You work for me. I assign tasks appropriate to your skills. You complete them to my satisfaction. A portion of your debt is forgiven with each completed assignment. Continue until the debt is paid in full, at which point you're free to go." Clara's mind raced. "What kind of tasks?" "That depends. What are your skills?" I was a teacher before I married Thomas. Elementary school. I haven't worked in years." "Can you organize? Manage details? Keep records?" "Yes, but can you follow instructions precisely? Handle sensitive information without discussing it?" "I suppose, but what kind of—" "Then you're qualified." Victor stood, moved back behind his desk. "The work isn't difficult. It requires intelligence and discretion, both of which you appear to possess. You'll live here, on the property where I can ensure your safety and your compliance. You'll have your own quarters, meals provided, everything you need." "Live here." Clara's stomach dropped. "You want me to move in? Like some kind of employee," Victor said calmly. "Under specialized circumstances." "Yes." "For how long?" "Until the debt is paid. At the current interest rate and projected value of your work." He pulled a folder from his desk, flipped it open. "Approximately 18 months." 18 months. A year and a half of her life, trapped in this villa, working for a criminal, paying off her dead husband's debts. Clara stood abruptly. "This is insane. You can't just keep me prisoner for 18 months because of something my husband did." "You're not a prisoner, Mrs. DeLuca." Victor's voice remained maddeningly calm. "You're free to refuse. Walk out right now. Go home. The debt remains, of course, and debts have a way of collecting themselves when direct repayment isn't possible." The threat was clear. Clara felt trapped, cornered, her options narrowing to a single, impossible choice. "What does that mean? Are you threatening my family?" "I don't make threats. I state facts." Victor closed the folder. "Your mother lives on Rossi Street. Your sister in Rome has 2 young children. You have friends, coworkers from your teaching days, a whole network of people you care about. When someone owes me money and can't pay, I look for alternative sources of value. If you refuse my offer, I'll need to explore those alternatives." Clara's knees went weak. She grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself. "You would go after my family? For money my husband borrowed?" "I would collect what I'm owed by whatever means necessary. That's not personal, Mrs. DeLuca. It's simply business." Victor came around the desk again, and this time Clara did back away. He stopped, held up his hands. "But it doesn't have to come to that. Accept my offer. Work honestly. Pay your debt. No one else gets involved. Your family stays safe. and you walk away in 18 months with a clean slate. And if I go to the police, then you involve them in something that will end badly for everyone. I have lawyers, Mrs. DeLuca. Very good lawyers. Your husband came to me voluntarily, signed contracts willingly, borrowed money with full knowledge of the terms. I have documentation proving all of it. The police will find nothing illegal, just a legitimate debt and a widow trying to avoid her legal obligations. He paused. They also won't be able to protect you or your family. Not from everything. Not from everyone. Clara wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to wake up and discover this was all some horrible nightmare brought on by grief and stress. But Victor Romano stood in front of her, real and solid and completely in control, and she knew with sick certainty that he meant every word. She had no money, no power, no options. She had only this: accept servitude or risk everyone she loved. What exactly would I be doing? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Victor's expression softened fractionally. Not kindness, but perhaps acknowledgement that she was being practical. Administrative work, primarily. I need someone to organize files, manage schedules, coordinate communications. Nothing illegal, Mrs. DeLuca. Nothing that would violate your conscience or put you in danger. Just work. Honest work in service of a debt. And I'd live here? In this house? In the guest wing. Your own bedroom, bathroom, sitting area. You'd have privacy. Limited freedom of movement at first, but that can expand as trust develops. Trust. The word was almost funny coming from a man who'd just threatened her entire family. Clara looked around the office. At the expensive furniture, the city lights beyond the windows, the elegant trap closing around her. Do I have a choice? She asked. Everyone has choices, Mrs. DeLuca, but some choices have better outcomes than others. Victor walked to his desk, pulled out another folder and held it out to her. This is the contract. It specifies your duties, the value assigned to your work, the payment schedule against your debt. Read it carefully. If you agree, sign it. If not, he gestured toward the door. My driver will take you home, and we'll explore other options. Clara took the folder with numb fingers. Inside was a legal document, dense with terms and clauses outlining exactly what Victor had described: employment agreement, debt repayment schedule, conditions of residence. It all looked official, professional, almost reasonable if you ignored the fact that it was forced servitude dressed up in legal language. At the bottom of the last page was a line for her signature. She looked up at Victor. He watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes, waiting. If I sign this, Clara said slowly, and I fulfill every term, you promise the debt is paid? My family is safe? I can walk away after 18 months and never see you again? You have my word. The word of a criminal. Oh, Victor's jaw tightened fractionally. The word of a man who honors his agreements. I may not be what you consider respectable, Mrs. DeLuca, but I keep my promises. Sign that contract, do the work, and when the debt is paid, you're free. You'll never hear from me again. Clara looked down at the document. Her hands shook. This was insane. Impossible. She should refuse, should call his bluff, should do anything except sign away 18 months of her life to a stranger who'd threatened her family. But the email sat heavy in her memory. I know where you live. I know everything about you. Victor Romano was not a man who made empty threats. If she refused, he would act. Her mother, her sister, her nephews, they would all become targets in a game they didn't even know existed. Thomas had destroyed her life with his lies and his debts. Now she had to save everyone else from the wreckage. Clara found a pen in her purse. Her hand hovered over the signature line for a long moment. Then, with a sick sense of falling, she signed her name. Victor took the folder, glanced at the signature, and nodded. Wise choice. I'll have someone show you to your quarters. You can collect your things from your apartment tomorrow. For tonight, everything you need is already here. When do I start? Monday. That gives you 2 days to settle in and understand the house rules. He moved to the door, opened it. In the hallway stood a woman, late 40s, severe face, iron gray hair pulled into a tight bun. This is Sophia. She manages the household staff. She'll show you where you'll be staying. Sophia nodded curtly. This way, Mrs. DeLuca. Clara stood frozen for a moment, the reality of what she'd just done crashing over her. She'd signed herself over to a crime lord. She was going to live in his house, work for him, be trapped in his world for a year and a half. She looked at Victor one last time. "I hate you for this." "Hate me if it helps," Victor said evenly. "But do the work. That's all that matters." Clara followed Sophia out of the office, down hallways that all looked the same, up a flight of stairs to the second floor. The guest wing was quiet, isolated from the rest of the house. Sophia opened a door and stepped aside. "Your room," she said. "Bathroom through there. Sitting area. Kitchen access is downstairs. Meals are served at 7, 1, and 7. Don't wander. Don't touch anything you're not explicitly told to touch. Rules will be explained tomorrow." She left without another word. Clara stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. It was beautiful. Cream walls, plush carpet, a large bed with expensive linens, a window overlooking the gardens below. Like a luxury hotel room. Like a very nice cage. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her jacket, still holding her purse, and stared at nothing. Somewhere in the city below, her mother was probably watching television. Her sister was probably reading bedtime stories to her children. They had no idea that Clara's life had just been dismantled and rebuilt into something unrecognizable. They had no idea she'd become collateral for a dead man's debts. Clara lay back on the bed, closed her eyes, and let the tears come. Not for Thomas anymore. Not even for herself, really, but for the ordinary life she'd lost, for the safety she'd never have again, for the next 18 months stretching ahead like a sentence she couldn't appeal. Tomorrow she would collect her things. Monday she would start working for Victor Romano. And somehow she would survive this. She had to. Because there was no other choice left. Clara woke to unfamiliar silence. For a moment she forgot where she was. The bed was too soft, the sheets too fine, the light filtering through the curtains wrong somehow, too golden, too controlled. Then memory crashed back like cold water. The contract. Victor Romano's dark eyes watching her sign away her freedom, the walk through endless hallways to this beautiful prison. She sat up slowly, muscles aching from tension she'd carried through the night. The clock on the nightstand read 6:50. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than Clara had earned in a year of teaching. A soft knock came at the door. Clara pulled the blanket higher instinctively, suddenly aware she was still wearing yesterday's clothes. "Yes?" The door opened and Sophia entered, carrying a tray. She set it on the small table near the window without looking at Clara. "Breakfast. Mr. Romano expects you in his office at 9. Dress professionally." She turned to leave, then paused. "There are clothes in the closet. They should fit." "Wait." Clara started, but Sophia was already gone, the door closing with a quiet click that sounded final. Clara approached the closet warily, half expecting to find something degrading or inappropriate. Instead, she found business attire, blouses, slacks, a few simple dresses, all in neutral colors and her exact size. On the shelf above sat shoes, sensible heels, and flats. In the drawers, she found undergarments, still in packages, also her size. The accuracy was unsettling. Victor had said he knew everything about her, and apparently he'd meant it literally. She showered in the marble bathroom, used toiletries that smelled expensive and unfamiliar, and dressed in gray slacks and a white blouse that could have come from her own closet if her own closet had contained anything this well made. The woman in the mirror looked put together, professional, almost normal, if you ignored the fear in her eyes. At 8:50, Clara made her way downstairs. The villa was enormous, and she got lost twice before finding the hallway that led to Victor's office. The door was open. Inside, Victor sat at his desk, reading something on a tablet, wearing another perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than her car. He looked up as she hesitated in the doorway. "Mrs. DeLuca, punctual. Good." He gestured to the chair she'd sat in last night. "Come in. We have work to discuss." Clara entered, but didn't sit. "I need to go to my apartment today. Collect my things, like you said." "Already arranged. Sophia will accompany you at 10. Victor set down the tablet. "But first, we need to establish ground rules and expectations. Sit." It wasn't a request. Clara sat. Victor pulled a different folder from his desk, opened it between them. "Your primary responsibilities will be managing my schedule, organizing documentation for various business ventures, and handling communications that require discretion. Nothing illegal, he added, as if reading her mind. I have other people for activities that might trouble your conscience. What I need from you is intelligence and attention to detail. Why me? Clara asked. The question had haunted her all night. You could hire anyone. Why do you want someone who's here under duress? Because someone who's here under duress has motivation to perform perfectly. They understand consequences. Victor leaned back in his chair. And because your husband spoke about you sometimes. When he was nervous, trying to convince me to extend his deadlines, he talked about his brilliant wife who'd been a teacher, who could organize anything, who had a mind for details. He was a fool in many ways, but he wasn't wrong about that. The mention of Thomas made Clara's stomach turn. Don't talk about him like you knew him. I knew exactly what he was. A gambling addict who thought he could beat the odds through desperation and borrowed money. I've seen 100 men like him. They all end the same way. Victor's expression remained neutral. But we're not here to discuss your late husband. We're here to discuss your future. Are you ready to work, or would you prefer to continue mourning a man who lied to you for 2 years? The cruelty was casual, efficient, designed to cut through any remaining sentiment. Clara felt anger flare hot in her chest. You're a bastard. Yes, but I'm a bastard who honored my agreement to give you this opportunity instead of pursuing other collection methods. Remember that when you're tempted to hate me. Victor pushed a paper across the desk. This is your schedule for the week. Study it. Learn my routines. Tomorrow you'll shadow Sophia to understand how the household operates. Tuesday, you begin actual work. Clara took the paper, scanning the detailed blocks of time. Meetings with names she didn't recognize, phone calls scheduled to the minute, appointments that ranged from estate review to personnel matter with no additional context. What's a personnel matter? She asked. Exactly what it sounds like. I employ approximately 40 people across various enterprises. Sometimes those relationships need adjustment. Victor stood, came around the desk. You'll learn as you go. For now, just understand that everything in this house is organized according to specific systems. Learn the systems, follow them precisely, and never... He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Never discuss what you see or hear here with anyone outside these walls. That's not negotiable. Or what? Or the contract becomes void, and we return to discussing alternative collection methods. He held her gaze for a long moment, then stepped back. Sophia is waiting in the foyer. Collect what you need from your apartment. You have 2 hours. Clara stood on shaking legs. Can I see my family? My mother will worry if I just disappear. Tell her you're staying with a friend while you sort out Thomas's affairs. After the initial adjustment period, supervised visits can be arranged. Victor returned to his desk, already dismissing her. 2 hours, Mrs. DeLuca. Don't test my patience by being late. Clara left the office feeling like she'd survived the first round of something that would have many more rounds to come. She found Sophia in the foyer as promised, standing beside a different car, a dark SUV with tinted windows. The older woman's expression was unreadable. Ready? Do I have a choice? No. Sophia opened the car door. But Mr. Romano allows the illusion of choice when it serves his purposes. I suggest you appreciate that small mercy. They drove in silence back to Clara's apartment. In daylight, the city looked different. Normal people going about normal lives, completely unaware that Clara's world had been turned inside out. She watched them through the tinted window and felt the distance between herself and ordinary life stretching wider with every mile. The apartment building looked smaller than she remembered. Clara led Sophia upstairs, unlocked the door, and stepped into the space that had been her home for 6 years. Everything was exactly as she'd left it yesterday. The coffee cup still on the kitchen counter, Thomas's jacket still hanging by the door. The funeral program still on the table where she'd dropped it after returning from the cemetery. But it all felt abandoned already, like a museum exhibit of someone else's life. One suitcase, Sophia said from the doorway. Personal items only. Clothes, toiletries, photographs if you want them. Nothing else. Clara moved through the rooms mechanically, packing the pieces of her life that fit in a single suitcase. Clothes from the closet, though most of what she owned seemed shabby compared to what was already waiting in her room at the villa. her laptop, phone charger, a few books. In the bathroom, she grabbed her actual toiletries, even though the villas were nicer, because they felt like the only things in the world that were truly hers. In the bedroom, she paused at Thomas's nightstand. She should feel something, shouldn't she? Some residual grief or anger, or even curiosity about the man who'd slept beside her while planning his own destruction? But there was only emptiness and a vague disgust that she'd been so blind. She opened the drawer, found his wedding ring. He'd taken it off before he died, left it here like he knew he wouldn't need it anymore. Clara stared at it for a moment, then closed the drawer. Let whoever cleaned out the apartment eventually deal with it. She wanted no reminders. In the living room, Clara took down a framed photo of her parents from the mantel, and one of her sister's children laughing in a park somewhere. These she wrapped carefully and placed in the suitcase. "Time," Sophia called. Clara took one last look around the apartment. 6 years of marriage reduced to a suitcase. She supposed she should be grateful there wasn't more worth taking. They drove back to the villa in the same silence. Clara watched the city disappear behind them, watched the gates open automatically as they approached, watched the beautiful prison appear at the top of the hill like something out of a dark fairy tale. "One more thing," Sophia said as they pulled up to the entrance. "Mr. Romano doesn't tolerate emotional displays. Whatever you're feeling, grief, anger, fear, keep it private. He respects control and discipline. Show him weakness and he'll use it." "That sounds like experience talking," Clara said quietly. Sophia's expression flickered, something that might have been surprise or recognition. "I've worked for Mr. Romano for 12 years. I know what he values and what he doesn't. Take the advice or don't. It's your survival." She got out of the car without waiting for a response. Clara followed her back to the guest wing, back to the room that was now her only space in the world. Sophia left her there, and Clara unpacked her single suitcase, putting her shabby clothes in the closet next to the expensive ones, her toiletries in the bathroom next to the luxury products, her photographs on the nightstand next to the designer lamp. The room absorbed her belongings and remained fundamentally unchanged, still beautiful, still a cage. Clara sat on the bed and called her mother. "Clara, thank goodness! I've been so worried. How are you holding up?" The concern in her mother's voice nearly broke her. Clara closed her eyes, forced her voice steady. "I'm okay, Mom. I'm staying with a friend for a while. I need some space to deal with everything." "Which friend? I could come visit, bring you some proper food." "No," Clara said too quickly. "I mean, I really need to be alone right now. I'll call you in a few days, I promise. I can't be in the apartment. Too many memories." "Oh, sweetheart." Her mother's voice softened with sympathy. "I understand. Take the time you need, but please, if you need anything at all, I will. I love you, Mom." "I love you too, darling. Call me soon." Clara ended the call and stared at the phone. Another lie. Another piece of her old life severed. She wondered how many more lies she'd have to tell before this was over, how much of herself she'd have to cut away to survive 18 months in Victor Romano's world. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a young man, maybe 25, dressed in the same professional style as the driver, holding a tray. "Lunch," he said, his accent thick. "Mr. Romano says you eat. Is important." He set the tray on the table and left before Clara could respond. The food was elegant, some kind of pasta with seafood, fresh bread, a side salad, and sparkling water. Restaurant quality, probably prepared by a private chef. Clara's stomach growled despite everything, reminding her she'd barely eaten since Thomas died. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, staring out the window at the gardens below. Somewhere in the villa, Victor Romano was conducting whatever business required a crime lord's attention on a Saturday afternoon. And on Monday, Clara would become part of that business, her life reduced to serving a debt she'd never asked for. The afternoon stretched endless and empty. Clara tried to read but couldn't focus, tried to sleep but couldn't relax. Finally, she opened her laptop and searched for Victor Romano's name. The results were surprisingly sparse. A few mentions in local business articles, always vague. Real estate developer Victor Romano, or investment consultant Victor Romano. Nothing about criminal enterprise or underworld activity. Either he was very good at keeping his business off the record, or the journalists who knew better had learned not to write about him. She found one photograph from a charity gala 3 years ago. Victor, in a tuxedo, standing with a beautiful woman in a silver dress, both of them smiling for the camera. The caption identified her as Elena Moretti, philanthropist and art collector. No mention of her relationship to Victor. Clara stared at the photo. Victor looked different in it, softer somehow, less dangerous. The woman beside him had her hand on his arm, casual and familiar. Were they together? Had they been? Did Victor Romano have a personal life beyond debts and threats and business empires built on fear? She closed the laptop, disturbed by her own curiosity. It didn't matter who Victor Romano was when he smiled for charity galas. It only mattered who he was in his office, in his fortress villa, in the moment he'd placed his hand on her shoulder and spoken the word that destroyed her life. Debt. Evening came with another knock, another tray of food, the same young man who said nothing beyond dinner, eat. Clara did eat, more out of self-preservation than hunger. Whatever came next, she would need her strength. Night fell. Clara changed into the pajamas that had been provided, soft cotton that fit perfectly, like everything else in this place, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Sunday. One more day of limbo before her new life began in earnest. She thought about running. The window overlooked gardens, but she was on the second floor. Even if she could climb down, the property had gates and cameras and security staff who would stop her before she made it halfway down the hill. And even if she somehow escaped, where would she go? Back to the apartment Victor knew about? To her mother's house, putting her family in danger. To the police, who would find nothing illegal in a legitimate debt and signed contract. There was no escape. Only endurance. Clara finally slept, restless and dream-haunted, and woke Sunday morning to the same routine. Breakfast delivered, silence from the rest of the house, hours stretching empty and anxious. She avoided exploring, afraid of crossing some invisible boundary that would bring Sophia or Victor himself to remind her of the rules. Late afternoon, she heard voices in the hallway outside her door. Male voices, speaking rapid Italian with an edge that made Clara freeze. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Anger, argument, something building toward violence. Then Victor's voice, calm and cold as winter ice. Enough! The argument stopped. Footsteps receded. Silence returned, heavier than before. Clara stood with her hand pressed against the door, heart pounding, reminded viscerally that she was living in a world where violence simmered just beneath the surface of expensive suits and beautiful architecture. This wasn't a luxury hotel. It was the headquarters of a criminal empire, and she was trapped inside it. Sunday night, Clara barely slept. She lay awake listening to the villa's sounds, footsteps in distant hallways, cars arriving and departing, once what might have been a woman's laughter from somewhere far below. The house was alive with activity she couldn't see, business she didn't understand, a whole ecosystem of crime and power operating around her like currents beneath still water. Monday morning arrived with brutal finality. Sophia collected her at 8 sharp, led her downstairs to Victor's office. He looked up from his desk as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. DeLuca, are you ready to begin?" Clara lifted her chin. "Do I have a choice?" "You always have choices. You've simply made yours already." He gestured to a smaller desk positioned near the window. Clara hadn't noticed it Friday night, but now she saw it was equipped with a computer, phone, filing cabinets. "That's your workspace. Sophia will show you the systems. You'll start with simple organization, filing documents, managing correspondence, learning how information flows through this office. Questions? What if I make a mistake? Don't. Victor returned his attention to whatever he'd been reading. Sophia, show her the basics. I have a call in 10 minutes. Sophia led Clara to the smaller desk. For the next 3 hours, she explained the filing system, color-coded folders for different business ventures, strict protocols for what could be stored digitally versus what required hard copies, elaborate security measures for sensitive documents that made Clara's head spin. "Everything has a place," Sophia said, pulling open one of the filing cabinets. Real estate acquisitions in green folders, alphabetical by property, investment portfolios in blue, organized by client surname, personnel files in red, strictly confidential. She fixed Clara with a sharp look. "You don't read personnel files unless specifically instructed. You don't discuss anything you see in those files, ever. Understood? Yes, Clara said, though her mind reeled with questions about what exactly was in those red folders that required such secrecy. The computer system was equally complex. Password-protected databases, encrypted email, specialized software for tracking finances that Clara had never seen before. Sophia walked her through each program with military efficiency, no patience for questions or confusion. You'll learn by doing, she said. Mr. Romano expects competence, not excuses. If you don't understand something, figure it out quietly. Don't waste his time with questions that research could answer. By noon, Clara's head throbbed with information overload. Victor had been on and off phone calls all morning, speaking in Italian too rapid for Clara to follow, even if she'd understood the language. He conducted business like a general commanding troops, precise, decisive, allowing no room for uncertainty or debate. Lunch, Sophia announced at 1 o'clock sharp, producing sandwiches and coffee that appeared from nowhere. She set Clara's portion on the small desk without ceremony. Victor ate at his desk, still working, barely acknowledging the food. Clara picked at her sandwich, too nervous to taste it. Mrs. DeLuca, Victor said suddenly, making her jump. There's a meeting at 3. I need you to take notes. Can you type quickly? Yes, Clara said. I used to eat. I don't need your resume, just accuracy. He returned to his computer. Conference room, 3rd floor. Be there at 2:55. At 2:55, Clara stood outside a door labeled simply Conference A, her laptop clutched to her chest like a shield. Inside, she could hear male voices, multiple men, speaking that same rapid Italian she couldn't decipher. Sophia appeared beside her. Go in, sit in the back corner, record everything they say. Don't speak unless Mr. Romano addresses you directly. And whatever you hear, I know, Clara interrupted. I never discuss it with anyone, ever. Sophia studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good, you're learning. Clara opened the door. The conference room was dominated by a long table where 5 men sat, Victor at the head, the others arranged down the sides. They looked up as Clara entered, conversation stopping mid-word. She felt their eyes assess her, dismiss her, return to Victor with questions they didn't voice aloud. Gentlemen, Victor said calmly, this is Mrs. DeLuca. She'll be recording our meeting for documentation purposes. Continue. Clara slipped into the corner chair, opened her laptop, and tried to become invisible. The men returned to their discussion, switching to English, either for her benefit or because Victor had signaled them to do so. Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing everything. They were discussing property acquisition in the Port District, warehouses that needed to be secured through purchases or alternative arrangements. One man, older, silver-haired, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, argued for direct acquisition. Another, younger, nervous energy, suggested working through proxy companies to avoid drawing attention. Victor listened more than he spoke, his dark eyes moving from speaker to speaker, absorbing information with the focus of a predator tracking prey. The direct approach has merit, he said finally, and the room went quiet. But Antonio is right about discretion. Marco, set up the proxy structures. 3 layers minimum. I want the paper trail so tangled that even determined investigators give up halfway through. Marco, the nervous one, nodded. It'll take 2 weeks, maybe 3. You have 1 week, Victor said. The opportunity won't wait longer than that. Giuseppe, what's the situation with the dock workers? The scarred man leaned back in his chair. They're organized. Union leadership is resistant to outside influence. We could apply pressure. No. Victor's voice was flat. No pressure that draws media attention. Offer incentives instead. Better contracts, improve safety measures, whatever it takes to secure their cooperation. I want alliance, not intimidation. Clara's fingers stumbled on the keyboard. She'd expected... what? Explicit talk of violence? Blatant criminality? Instead, this sounded almost like legitimate business strategy, if you ignored the implications behind phrases like alternative arrangements and secured cooperation. The meeting continued for 90 minutes. Clara typed until her wrists ached, capturing discussions about shipping schedules, customs procedures, personnel rotations. Nothing overtly illegal, but everything saturated with the sense that what she was hearing was only the surface layer of much deeper operations. Finally, Victor stood. "Thank you, gentlemen. Marco, I want those proxy structures on my desk by Friday. Giuseppe, keep me updated on the union situation daily. The rest of you know your assignments." The men filed out, each stopping to shake Victor's hand or murmur brief acknowledgments. Clara stayed in her corner, saving her notes, trying not to draw attention. When they were alone, Victor approached. "Let me see what you recorded." Clara turned the laptop toward him, pulse hammering. Victor scanned through her notes, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "Acceptable. Format this into a proper summary. Action items, deadlines, responsible parties. I want it by end of day." "I don't know how to..." Victor pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "Examples are here. Match the format. Use the template." He handed her the drive. "And Mrs. DeLuca, everything you heard in this room stays in this room. If I discover you've discussed any of it with anyone, family, friends, a priest in confession, the contract is void. Clear?" "Crystal clear," Clara said, hating how small her voice sounded. Victor left her alone in the conference room. Clara sat in the silence, staring at her laptop screen filled with notes about port acquisitions and union negotiations and business strategies that were probably covers for things she didn't want to imagine. This was her life now. Recording meetings, organizing documents, keeping secrets for a man who built empires in shadows. She returned to Victor's office, plugged in the flash drive, and opened the template files. They were meticulously organized. Examples of meeting summaries, correspondence logs, financial reports, all formatted with military precision. Clara forced herself to focus, to push aside the fear and disgust, and focus only on matching the format, completing the task, proving she could do what was required. By 6 o'clock, she'd finished. She saved the document, printed a copy, and placed it on Victor's desk. He was on the phone again, speaking in rapid Italian. He glanced at the summary, nodded once, and gestured for her to leave. Claire retreated to her workspace, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. Her first day had been all surface, administrative work, note-taking, filing, but underneath she felt the weight of what she'd really done. She'd become complicit, an employee in an organization she knew was criminal, even if today's work had carefully avoided anything explicitly illegal. "Mrs. DeLuca," she looked up. Victor stood from his desk, stretching slightly, the first casual movement she'd seen from him. "Your work today was satisfactory. Go upstairs. Dinner will be brought to your room. Tomorrow we'll review your notes and discuss your performance." "That's it?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. "You expected more?" "I expected, I don't know, something harder, more obviously criminal." Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "Disappointment or relief?" "I don't know that either." "Honesty." "Good." He turned back to his desk. "Most of what I do, Mrs. DeLuca, is business. Legitimate business that happens to exist in gray areas the law hasn't adequately defined. You won't be asked to do anything that violates your conscience, not because I'm merciful, but because I don't need you for those tasks. I need you for exactly what you did today. Organization, precision, discretion. And if I see something that does violate my conscience, then you'll keep it to yourself, complete your contract, and leave with your debt paid and your family safe. That was the agreement. I'm a man of my word, Mrs. DeLuca. Even if you don't believe anything else about me, believe that." Clara stood slowly, gathering her things. At the door she paused. "Why did you switch to English in the meeting?" "So you could understand. Notes are useless if you don't comprehend what's being discussed." "But the men, they could have stayed in Italian. You could have translated for me after." Victor looked up from his computer, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I prefer efficiency. Teaching you Italian would take months. Having you understand discussions in real time serves my interests better." It was a logical answer, practical. But Clara sensed something else underneath, a choice Victor had made that benefited her as much as him, even if he'd never admit it. She left the office and climbed the stairs to her room, her mind churning. The first day of 18 months was done. 547 more days stretched ahead like a prison sentence. But she'd survived this one, completed her tasks, proven she could function in Victor's world without collapsing or rebelling. It wasn't much, but it was something. In her room, dinner waited as promised. Roasted chicken, vegetables, bread that smelled like it had come from an actual bakery. Clara ate slowly, processing everything she'd learned. The villa's routines, Sophia's expectations, the format of Victor's meetings, the careful language that kept everything plausibly legitimate while everyone involved understood the reality beneath. She'd taken the first step into a world she didn't understand and couldn't escape. Tomorrow, she would take another step, and another, and another, until either the debt was paid or she lost herself completely in the process. Clara finished eating and stood at the window, looking out over the city lights below. All those ordinary people living ordinary lives, completely unaware of the extraordinary cage that held her now. She placed her hand against the glass, feeling its coolness, its barrier between her and freedom. 547 days, she whispered to her reflection. And somewhere below, in his office filled with secrets and power, Victor Romano continued working through the night, building his empire one careful decision at a time. The days blurred into weeks with a rhythm that was both numbing and exhausting. Clara woke each morning to breakfast delivered at precisely 6:30, dressed in the professional clothes that had become a uniform, and arrived at Victor's office by 8. She filed documents, managed schedules, took notes in meetings where men spoke in careful euphemisms about shipments and territories and personnel issues that were never quite explained. She formatted reports, answered phones with scripts Sophia had drilled into her, and learned to read Victor's moods from the set of his shoulders and the tone of his voice. She learned that Tuesday mornings meant financial reviews, that Thursday afternoons were reserved for what Victor called estate management, but what Clara suspected involved coordinating activities across his various enterprises, that Friday evenings he met with a rotating cast of well-dressed men who arrived in expensive cars and left looking either satisfied or worried depending on how their conversations had gone. She learned to be invisible when Victor needed to focus, efficient when he demanded information, and absolutely silent about everything she saw and heard. 3 weeks became 4. 4 became 6. The villa became familiar, its hallways and rooms, its routines and rules, the household staff who acknowledged her with nods but never conversation. Clara existed in a strange limbo between employee and prisoner, neither trusted nor entirely restricted. Her world narrowed to Victor's office and her upstairs room and the careful dance of competence that kept her safe. She called her mother twice a week, lying smoothly about staying with friends, about processing grief, about needing space. Her mother worried but accepted the explanations, and Clara hated how easily the deception came now. She didn't call her sister, couldn't bear to hear her nephew's laughter, and know she might never see them again if something went wrong here. The debt balance updated monthly, posted to a private portal Victor had given her access to. Each month, a portion was deducted based on her work's assigned value. The number decreased with agonizing slowness, 380,000 becoming 371, then 363. At this rate, 18 months was optimistic. 20 months felt more realistic. 20 months of living in a cage, no matter how beautiful. But something unexpected was happening too, something Clara didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't entirely ignore. She was getting good at the work. The filing systems that had seemed impossibly complex became second nature. The specialized software made sense. She anticipated what Victor needed before he asked for it, learned to read his abbreviated instructions and deliver exactly what he wanted. "You're adapting well," Sophia said one afternoon, her tone suggesting this was not entirely a compliment. "Mr. Romano values competence. Don't mistake his satisfaction for kindness." Clara looked up from the correspondence she was organizing. "I don't mistake anything about Mr. Romano for kindness." "Good. Others have made that error. It never ends well." Sophia paused, then added more quietly, "But competence can earn you small freedoms. Prove you're trustworthy, and the cage expands." It was the closest thing to encouragement Sophia had ever offered. Clara nodded, filed the information away, and returned to work. That night, Victor called her into his office after hours. Clara's stomach tightened. Their interactions had been strictly professional, limited to work discussions and brief instructions. Late-night summons felt different, unpredictable. She found him standing at the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city lights. He didn't turn when she entered. "You've been here 6 weeks," he said. "How are you finding the work?" Clara hesitated, unsure what answer he wanted. "It's manageable." Manageable. Victor turned, and in the low light of the office, his face was half shadow. "That's diplomatic. Sophia tells me you're exceeding expectations, learning quickly, making yourself useful." "I'm doing what the contract requires." "You're doing more than that." He moved to his desk, pulled out a file, handed it to her. "This is the summary you prepared for last Thursday's estate review. It's excellent work. Comprehensive, well-organized, exactly what I needed. Better than what my previous assistant produced, and he'd been working for me for 3 years. Clara opened the file, recognized her own formatting. "Thank you." "It's not a compliment. It's an observation." Victor leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "You have a mind for details and patterns. You see connections between pieces of information that others miss. That's valuable to me." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you continue performing at this level, I'm willing to adjust the debt calculation. Increase the value assigned to your work. It would reduce your time here, potentially by several months." Clara's heart jumped. Several months meant the difference between 20 months and maybe 15, maybe less. She forced herself to stay calm, to think past the immediate relief. "What would I have to do differently?" "Handle more sensitive material, coordinate between different divisions of my business, essentially become my primary administrative executive instead of just an assistant." Victor's dark eyes studied her. "It would mean longer hours, more responsibility, deeper involvement in operations you currently only glimpse." "Deeper involvement in criminal operations," Clara said flatly. "Deeper involvement in my business," Victor corrected. "The nature of that business is not your concern. Your concern is performing tasks with the excellence you've already demonstrated. Do that, and your debt gets paid faster. Refuse, and we continue as we have been. The choice is yours." Clara looked down at the file in her hands, at the evidence of her own competence. 6 weeks ago, she would have refused immediately, clung to whatever moral high ground she could claim. But 6 weeks of living in Victor's world had taught her that moral high ground was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not if she wanted to survive this. Not if she wanted to get back to her life before she lost it entirely. "How much faster?" she asked quietly. "Dependent on performance, but my estimate is 12 to 14 months total. Possibly less if you prove exceptional. 12 months. 1 year instead of almost 2. Clara met Victor's gaze. "And my family stays safe? That doesn't change?" "Nothing changes except the value calculation and your responsibilities. The original terms remain in effect." "Then I accept." Victor nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. "Good. Starting Monday, you'll have access to additional files and databases. Sophia will brief you on the new protocols, and Mrs. DeLuca." He paused. "The increase in responsibility comes with increased expectations. Mistakes that were tolerable for simple filing work become unacceptable at this level. Understood?" "Perfectly." "Then you're dismissed." Clara returned to her room that night with her mind racing. She'd just agreed to become more deeply entangled in Victor's operations, to take on work that would probably implicate her further in whatever illegal activities lurked beneath the legitimate veneer. But she'd also bought herself months of freedom. Time was the only currency she had, and she'd just traded moral certainty for the possibility of getting her life back sooner. The calculation felt cold, practical, disturbingly easy. Maybe that was the most frightening part, how quickly she was learning to think like someone who belonged in Victor's world. The following Monday, Clara's access expanded dramatically. Sophia walked her through databases she hadn't known existed, personnel records for over 100 employees across different cities, financial tracking for dozens of properties and business ventures, communication logs that coordinated activities Clara could only guess at. "You'll be managing schedules for department heads," Sophia explained, pulling up a complex calendar system, ensuring their activities align with Mr. Romano's strategic priorities. "When Giuseppe needs dock access coordinated with Marco's shipping schedules, you'll be the one making sure the timing works. When Antonio needs to know which properties are available for particular uses, you'll provide that information." Clara stared at the screen, overwhelmed. How am I supposed to know what aligns with strategic priorities? You'll learn by observation and experience. Pay attention to patterns. Notice what Mr. Romano approves versus what he questions. Over time, you'll develop instincts for how he thinks. Sophia's expression remained neutral. And you'll make mistakes. Just don't make the same one twice. The first week at the elevated responsibility level was brutal. Clara worked 12-hour days, cross-referencing information across multiple systems, coordinating schedules for men she never met in person, fielding phone calls in Italian that required her to frantically use translation apps while trying to sound competent. She made mistakes, scheduled a meeting that conflicted with a shipment arrival, mixed up two similar property codes in a report, forgot to flag an urgent message from one of Victor's contacts in Rome. Victor's corrections were swift and cutting. This is unacceptable. I expect better. Do you understand how much this error could have cost me? But he didn't fire her, didn't void the contract, just demanded better, and Clara delivered it, working later each night, studying the files until she could recite property locations and personnel assignments from memory. Slowly, painfully, she improved. The system started making sense. She began to see the patterns Sophia had mentioned, how Victor's various enterprises interlocked, how personnel moved between divisions, how resources flowed from one area to another in careful coordination. She was managing a criminal empire's administrative infrastructure. The realization hit her late one night as she updated shipping schedules that she knew, absolutely knew, had nothing to do with legitimate cargo. She was facilitating crimes, not committing them directly, but enabling them with her competence and efficiency. The knowledge should have devastated her, should have sent her running to Victor's office to resign, consequences be damned. Instead, she saved her work, updated the schedules, and went to bed. Survival had become more important than morality. Clara wasn't sure when the shift had happened, only that it had, and there was no going back now. 8 weeks became 10, 10 became 12. Spring was turning toward summer, and Clara had been living in Victor's villa for 3 months. The debt balance showed steady progress. 320,000, 305, 291. At the current rate, she'd be done in 11 months. Less than a year. She could survive less than a year. The villa's routines became her routines. She knew which mornings Victor went for early runs through the grounds, knew which afternoons he took calls from his contacts in Milan and Turin, knew which evenings he retreated to parts of the villa she wasn't allowed to enter. She learned the sounds of the house, footsteps that meant Sophia was approaching, car engines that signaled important arrivals, voices in distant rooms that indicated meetings she wasn't part of. She learned to read Victor too, in ways that surprised her, learned that when he rubbed his temples, he was dealing with frustration he wouldn't voice, learned that when his voice went very quiet, he was most dangerous, learned that he took his coffee black in the morning but with cream in the afternoon, that he preferred handwritten notes to digital ones for certain communications, that he had a tell when someone was lying to him, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a pause before responding. "You're staring," Victor said one afternoon, not looking up from the document he was reading. Clara jolted back to her own work. "Sorry, I was thinking." "About?" "About how you knew that man was lying earlier, in the meeting with the construction contractors. You asked him about the timeline, and I could see you didn't believe his answer before he'd even finished speaking." Victor set down the document. Because his answer was too specific. When people tell the truth, they hedge. They say, approximately, or roughly, or I think. When they lie, they provide exact details to sound more credible. He said exactly 17 days, which told me he'd calculated what I wanted to hear rather than what was actually true. That's actually clever. It's observation. Same skill you've been developing. Victor leaned back in his chair. You're learning to see beneath surfaces, Mrs. DeLuca. It's making you better at your work. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, same as before. But there was something different in his tone. Something that wasn't quite warmth, but wasn't entirely cold either. Clara returned to her computer, unsettled by the moment of genuine conversation. 3 months of working in proximity to Victor Romano, and this was the first time they'd discussed anything beyond immediate work needs. It felt dangerous, like crossing a line she hadn't noticed was there. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about the interaction, about how she'd started noticing details about Victor, Not just his work patterns, but him. The way he sometimes paused before entering his office, as if steeling himself for whatever waited inside. The way he occasionally looked at the photograph on his desk, the one of him and the woman in the silver dress from the charity gala. The way his shoulders carried tension he never acknowledged. She was seeing him as a person instead of just a captor. That was a mistake. Had to be a mistake. Victor Romano had threatened her family, trapped her in servitude, controlled every aspect of her life. He wasn't a person to understand or sympathize with. He was an obstacle to survive and escape. But the observation lingered. You're learning to see beneath surfaces. And Clara wasn't entirely sure whose surfaces she was learning to see through, the people Victor dealt with, or Victor himself. The shift came during the 13th week, on a Thursday afternoon that started like any other. Victor had meetings scheduled all day, the usual rotation of associates and employees and contacts who came seeking approval or resources or solutions to problems Clara wasn't privy to. She managed the flow, ensured each appointment started on time, provided any documentation Victor needed. The last appointment was with a man Clara hadn't seen before. He arrived at 5, dressed in an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the violence in his posture. Giuseppe, who'd been waiting in the outer office, stood when the man entered, and Clara saw his hand move instinctively toward his jacket. Toward a weapon, she realized with a cold jolt. "Mr. Romano is expecting you," Clara said carefully, using the script Sophia had taught her for potentially dangerous visitors. The man ignored her, walked straight into Victor's office without knocking. Giuseppe followed, closing the door behind them but remaining inside, also unusual. Standard procedure was for Victor to meet people alone unless he specifically requested security presence. Clara tried to focus on her work, but the voices from the office carried. Not words exactly, but tone. The stranger's voice was loud, aggressive. Victor's remained calm, controlled. Then Giuseppe's voice, sharp and warning. A crash. Something heavy hitting the floor. Clara jumped, pulse spiking. Through the closed door she heard shouting now. The stranger's voice raised to a roar. Victor's voice cutting through like a blade. Giuseppe clearly trying to intervene. Then, a sound Clara would never forget. A gunshot, muffled but unmistakable, followed by a heavy thud. Clara's hands froze on her keyboard. Time seemed to stop. She stared at the office door, her mind screaming at her to run, to hide, to do something other than sit paralyzed while violence erupted 10 feet away. The door opened. Giuseppe emerged, his face grim, blood on his hands. He saw Clara and said curtly, "Stay here, don't move." He disappeared down the hallway. Clara sat rigid, terror warring with horrible curiosity. What had happened? Who had been shot? Was Victor? The thought was cut off by Victor himself appearing in the doorway. He was alive, upright, but his white shirt was stained with blood across the left shoulder, and his face had gone pale beneath its usual tan. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious pain. "Call Dr. Marchesi. Numbers in the emergency contacts. Tell him it's urgent but contained. Then lock the outer office door and don't let anyone in except him." Clara scrambled for her phone, hands shaking so badly she could barely navigate the contacts. Found Dr. Marchesi, dialed, barely registered the professional voice that answered. "This is Clara DeLuca calling for Victor Romano," she said, amazed her voice worked at all. "He needs you immediately. He said to tell you it's urgent but contained." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep him still and apply pressure to any wounds." The line went dead. Clara stood on trembling legs, crossed to the office door. Inside, the stranger lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath his head. Victor sat in his desk chair, one hand pressed against his shoulder, the other holding a gun she'd never seen before. "The door," Victor said tightly. "Lock it now." Clara retreated, locked the outer office door, returned to find Victor still sitting, still bleeding. "You're hurt. I should do something. There's a first aid kit in the cabinet. 3rd drawer, bring it." Clara found the kit, brought it to him with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Victor managed to remove his jacket with a grimace, revealing the blood-soaked shirt beneath. "Help me," he said quietly. "I can't reach it properly with my right hand." Clara hesitated. This was beyond anything she'd imagined, beyond the administrative work and careful distance she'd maintained. But Victor was bleeding, and the doctor wouldn't arrive for 20 minutes. and standing there refusing to help felt unconscionable despite everything he'd done to her. She opened the kit, found gauze and antiseptic, and approached cautiously. "I'm not a nurse. I don't know how—" "Just apply pressure, like the doctor said." Clara carefully peeled back Victor's ruined shirt. The wound was in his upper shoulder, still bleeding but not arterial. A graze, maybe, or a through and through that had missed anything vital. She pressed gauze against it, and Victor hissed through his teeth. "Sorry," Clara whispered. "It's fine, keep pressure." They stayed like that, Clara standing close enough to smell his cologne mixed with blood and gunpowder, Victor breathing carefully through pain he refused to show. Behind them, the dead man lay in spreading darkness, and Clara tried very hard not to think about how she was tending to a killer while stepping around his victim. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Disagreement about terms. He thought a gun would strengthen his negotiating position. He was wrong." Victor's voice was tight but controlled. "Giuseppe will handle the cleanup. You didn't see anything. Understood?" "I saw everything." "No, Mrs. DeLuca. You were at your desk. You heard raised voices. When I called for the doctor, you made the call and locked the door as instructed. That's all you know. That's all you'll ever know if anyone asks." Clara pressed harder against the wound, feeling Victor's blood warm and sticky on her hands. "And if I can't forget what I saw?" "Then you'll learn to live with it, same as you've learned to live with everything else here." The brutal honesty was somehow worse than a threat would have been. Clara kept pressure on the wound, watched Victor's face for signs he might pass out, and tried to process that she was now complicit in covering up a murder. Not an accessory, not a witness who could claim ignorance, but someone actively helping the aftermath, treating the wound, maintaining the lie. Dr. Marchese arrived exactly 20 minutes later, a thin man in his 60s who took in the scene with practiced calm and asked no questions. He treated Victor's shoulder efficiently, confirmed it was a clean graze that would heal without complications, prescribed antibiotics and pain medication, and left as quietly as he'd come. Giuseppe returned with 2 other men Clara didn't know. They removed the body with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, cleaned the blood, removed all evidence that violence had occurred in Victor's office. Within an hour, everything looked normal, perfectly normal, as if a man hadn't died there. Victor sat at his desk, his shoulder bandaged beneath a fresh shirt, his face still pale, but his composure restored. "You should go to your room, Mrs. DeLuca. It's been a long day." Clara hadn't moved from where she'd frozen near the door, watching the cleanup crew work. "You killed someone right here, and you're acting like it's nothing." "It's not nothing. It's unfortunate. But it was necessary." Victor's dark eyes met hers. "He came here to kill me. I defended myself. That's not murder, Mrs. DeLuca. That's survival." "And the cleanup? The disposing of evidence? That's survival too?" "That's practicality. The police would ask questions I don't have time to answer. This way is cleaner." Clara laughed, a brittle sound that didn't feel like it came from her. "Cleaner. Right, because this is so clean." "Go to your room," Victor said again, more firmly. "Process what you saw however you need to, but tomorrow you'll be back at your desk. Work continues. Life continues. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," Clara whispered. "No," Victor said quietly. "Everything has been revealed. There's a difference. You knew what I was from the moment I approached you at your husband's funeral. Today you simply saw it demonstrated. But the fundamental truth hasn't changed. I'm exactly who I've always been." Clara turned and walked out, her legs barely holding her, her mind fracturing around the images she couldn't unsee. She made it to her room, locked the door, and collapsed against it, her hands still sticky with Victor's blood. She'd known. Intellectually, abstractly, she'd known Victor Romano was dangerous, a crime lord, someone who used violence as a tool. But knowing and seeing were different. Knowing let her maintain distance, let her pretend the administrative work was somehow separate from the reality of what that work supported. Seeing destroyed that illusion completely. Clara went to the bathroom, scrubbed Victor's blood from her hands until her skin was raw, and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger, hollow-eyed, haunted, trapped in a nightmare that kept expanding to swallow everything she'd thought she understood. She should run. Should go to the police despite Victor's warnings, should tell them everything, should let whatever consequences come. But even as the thought formed, Clara knew it was fantasy. Giuseppe had cleaned up a murder scene in under an hour. Victor had contacts in law enforcement. She'd coordinated enough phone calls to know that. The police wouldn't help. They'd either be in Victor's pocket or they'd be powerless against his lawyers and influence. And her family would pay the price for her defiance. Clara was trapped, more completely than ever before, because now she wasn't just serving a debt, she was complicit in covering up murder. If she tried to leave, tried to testify, she'd implicate herself. Victor had bound her to him not just with contracts and threats, but with shared culpability. The calculation was brilliant and horrifying in equal measure. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the gunshot, the blood, Victor's calm instructions while a man's body cooled on his office floor. She'd helped him, tended his wound, followed his orders. She'd chosen his life over whatever justice the dead man might have deserved, and she'd made that choice without hesitation. What did that make her? Morning came with the usual breakfast delivery. Clara forced herself to eat, to shower, to dress in her professional uniform, and walk downstairs to Victor's office like this was any other day. Victor was already at his desk, working on his computer, his left arm moving more stiffly than usual, but otherwise showing no sign of yesterday's violence. He looked up as Clara entered. "Good morning, Mrs. DeLuca." Clara stopped in the doorway. "How's your shoulder?" "Sore but functional. Thank you for your assistance yesterday." His tone was formal, distant, as if she'd helped him with a difficult report rather than a gunshot wound. "There's a backlog of correspondence that needs organizing. I've flagged the priorities." Just like that. Work continues. Life continues. Nothing has changed. Clara moved to her desk, opened her computer, and began working through the correspondence. She could feel Victor's attention on her periodically, assessing, perhaps expecting her to break down or demand answers or quit despite the consequences. But Clara did none of those things. She worked with the same competence she'd developed over 3 months, organized the correspondence, managed the schedules, took notes in the afternoon meetings where men discussed shipping routes and property acquisitions and careful euphemisms. Because what else could she do? She was caught in a web of her own survival instincts and Victor's careful manipulation, bound by debts, both financial and moral, trapped in a cage that had just revealed iron bars beneath its beautiful exterior. As the day ended and Clara prepared to retreat to her room, Victor called her name. She turned. He stood from his desk, moved toward her, and for a moment Clara felt genuine fear. But Victor stopped at a respectful distance. "You handled yesterday well," he said quietly. "Better than I expected. Many people would have fallen apart or made poor decisions in panic. You remained calm, followed instructions, helped when needed." He paused. "That's noted and appreciated." "I didn't do it for your appreciation," Clara said. "I know, you did it for survival. That's even more impressive." Victor's dark eyes studied her. "You're stronger than you think, Mrs. DeLuca, stronger than your husband ever was." He crumbled under pressure. "You adapt." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "It's supposed to be honest." Victor returned to his desk. "The debt calculation will reflect your performance during the crisis. Consider it a bonus for exceptional work under difficult circumstances." Clara stared at him. "You're crediting my account because I helped cover up a murder?" "I'm crediting your account because you demonstrated qualities I value: composure, discretion, competence under pressure. The circumstances are irrelevant." "The circumstances are everything." "Then we disagree." Victor sat, returned his attention to his computer. "Good night, Mrs. DeLuca." Clara left the office, climbed the stairs to her room, and checked the debt portal on her laptop. The balance had dropped by 5,000 euros. One day's work, one day of helping a murderer, had bought her 2 weeks of freedom. The calculation was obscene. The calculation made perfect sense. Clara closed the laptop and sat in the growing darkness, understanding with bitter clarity that she'd crossed a line yesterday she could never uncross. She was no longer an unwilling prisoner serving a debt. She was a participant, an enabler. Someone who'd chosen Victor's survival over everything else because her own survival depended on it. The cage had expanded, just like Sophia had said, but the bars were still there, stronger than ever, forged now from complicity and shared secrets, and the blood that Clara couldn't quite wash from her memory, even though her hands were clean. She thought about the next 11 months stretching ahead, wondered what other lines she'd cross, what other choices she'd make that would erode the person she'd been before Thomas died. And Victor Romano spoke that single, terrible word. Debt. It wasn't just money anymore. It was something deeper, darker, infinitely more costly. And Clara was paying it one impossible decision at a time, watching herself transform into someone she didn't recognize and couldn't quite bring herself to hate. Because that stranger in the mirror was still alive, still protecting her family, still surviving. And in Victor Romano's world, survival was the only currency that mattered. The weeks following the shooting changed something fundamental between Clara and Victor, though neither acknowledged it directly. Clara found herself watching him more carefully now, noticing details she'd previously overlooked. The way he favored his left shoulder for days after Dr. Marchesi removed the stitches. The increased security presence around the villa. More men in dark suits, more cameras, more careful screening of visitors. The tension that lived in Victor's jaw during certain phone calls, the ones conducted in rapid Italian that made his knuckles go white around the phone. Someone had tried to kill him. Someone might try again. And Clara, whether she wanted to admit it or not, had found herself relieved when he survived. That relief disturbed her more than anything else that had happened in 4 months of captivity. "You're doing it again," Victor said one afternoon, not looking up from the contracts he was reviewing. Clara blinked. "Doing what?" Staring, thinking too loudly. He set down his pen, met her eyes across the office. "If you have questions, ask them. The wondering is distracting." Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than pretense. "I was thinking about the man who shot you, whether he had family, whether anyone mourned him. He had a wife and 2 sons in Calabria. Giuseppe sent them money, enough to live comfortably for several years. Anonymously, of course." Victor's expression remained neutral. "Does that answer satisfy you?" It should have made things worse. The casual revelation that Victor had researched his killer's family, had sent them compensation like a severance package. But instead, Clara felt something shift inside her. "Why did you do that?" "Because he had reasons for what he tried to do. Misguided reasons, but reasons nonetheless. His family shouldn't suffer for his mistakes." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Contrary to what you might believe, Mrs. De Luca, I don't enjoy creating widows and orphans. I avoid it when possible." "But you still killed him." "Yes, because he would have killed me if I hadn't. That's how this world works. You make choices in split seconds and live with the consequences." Victor paused. "Or die with them." Clara returned to her work, but her mind churned with the contradiction. Victor Romano, who'd threatened her family and forced her into servitude, had sent money to his would-be killer's widow. Victor Romano, who ran a criminal empire built on violence and intimidation, was paying for 2 boys in Calabria to grow up without poverty. The man was a monster, and something more complicated in the same breath. And Clara didn't know what to do with that knowledge. The increased security meant changes to the villa's routines. Clara was instructed to vary her schedule, to avoid patterns that could be predicted and exploited. She was given a panic button disguised as a pendant, told to wear it always, shown which doors locked automatically in case of intrusion. "Is this necessary?" she asked Sophia during one of the security briefings. "I'm not important enough to target." "You work closely with Mr. Romano. That makes you a potential pressure point." Sophia's expression was grimmer than usual. "The shooting was a warning. Others will test his vulnerabilities. You need to be prepared." The idea that she could be used against Victor, that her safety mattered to his enemies because it might matter to him, was absurd and terrifying. Clara was a prisoner here, collateral for a debt. She wasn't important to Victor beyond her administrative value. But the security measures suggested otherwise, and that realization sat heavy and uncomfortable in Clara's chest. 5 months became 6. The summer heat pressed down on Naples, and the villa's air conditioning ran constantly. Clara's debt balance showed steady progress: 260,000, 243, 227. She'd crossed the halfway point without noticing exactly when. Less time remained than she'd already served. The thought should have filled her with relief. Instead, Clara felt something closer to disorientation. What would she do when this ended? Return to her empty apartment and her dead husband's lies? Resume teaching, pretending the past year hadn't fundamentally altered who she was? She'd spent 6 months managing a criminal empire's logistics. She'd covered up murder. She'd become complicit in activities she couldn't even name but knew were illegal. Who would she be when she walked out of Victor's villa? Certainly not the woman who'd entered it. "You're distracted today," Victor observed during an afternoon meeting with his financial advisors. Clara had missed noting an important detail, had to ask for a repeat of information she should have caught the first time. "Sorry," she murmured, refocusing on her laptop. After the advisors left, Victor remained at the conference table instead of returning to his office. "What's troubling you?" Clara debated deflecting, then decided against it. 6 months of working in close proximity had taught her that Victor respected honesty more than comfortable lies. "I was thinking about what happens when my contract ends, what I'm supposed to do with everything I know." "You'll sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Then you'll leave and rebuild your life however you choose." Victor's tone suggested this was obvious. "The debt will be paid. You'll be free." "Free," Clara repeated, "except I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I helped run a criminal organization, that I covered up murder, that I—" She stopped, surprised by the emotion threatening to break through her careful control. "That you survived," Victor finished quietly. "You did what you had to do to protect yourself and your family. There's no shame in that." "You would say that. You're the one who forced me into this position." "Yes, and you've exceeded every expectation I had when I made that choice." Victor stood, moved to the window overlooking the city. "You were supposed to be adequate. Competent enough to handle administrative work but not exceptional. Instead, you've become indispensable. I trust you with information I wouldn't share with people who've worked for me for years. That wasn't part of the plan." Clara stared at his back, processing the admission. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when your contract ends, I'll offer you the opportunity to stay, not as a debtor, but as a genuine employee, at a salary that reflects your actual value." Victor turned, met her eyes. "You could leave Naples if you wanted, start fresh somewhere else with enough money to make it comfortable. Or you could stay and continue the work you've proven you're excellent at." The offer hung in the air between them, impossible and tempting in equal measure. Clara's first instinct was to refuse immediately, to reject any suggestion that she'd willingly continue working for Victor Romano. But the words stuck in her throat because underneath the revulsion was something else, something that recognized the truth in what Victor had said. She was good at this work, better than she'd ever been at teaching, if she was honest. The complexity challenged her, the responsibility gave her purpose, and the competence she'd developed here made her feel capable in ways her previous life never had. But it was built on crime and violence and moral compromises she'd never imagined making. "I can't," Clara said finally. "I can't stay here voluntarily. That would make me—" "What I am," Victor asked. "A criminal? You're already complicit, Mrs. DeLuca. Staying or leaving doesn't change what you've already done. It only determines whether you continue benefiting from the skills you've developed or try to pretend the past 6 months didn't happen. You're twisting everything. I'm being honest, something you claim to value." Victor returned to his desk. "You don't need to decide now. You have months remaining on your contract. But consider the offer. Think about what you actually want instead of what you think you're supposed to want." Clara left the conference room feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Victor's offer should have been insulting, proof that he'd never intended to truly let her go. Instead, it felt like recognition, like he'd seen something in her that she hadn't acknowledged in herself, that she belonged in this world more than she'd ever belonged in her old life. The realization was devastating and liberating in the same breath. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about choices and consequences and the person she was becoming. She thought about her mother, who still believed Clara was processing grief with friends, about her sister, who'd stopped calling after Clara's third vague excuse about being too busy to visit, about the life she'd had before Thomas died, quiet, predictable, safe. She didn't miss it. That was the truth she'd been avoiding for months. She didn't miss teaching kids who barely paid attention, didn't miss the apartment she'd shared with a liar, didn't miss being invisible in her own life, just the quiet wife who made dinner and asked no questions. Here, she mattered. Her work had consequences. Victor relied on her judgment, trusted her competence, treated her like an equal in their professional interactions despite the fundamental inequality of their relationship. It was twisted and wrong and utterly intoxicating. Clara was in danger of wanting to stay, and that scared her more than anything else that had happened in this beautiful prison. The breaking point came during the 7th month, on a Friday evening that began with routine and ended with everything changing. Victor had been tense all day, fielding calls from his contacts in other cities, coordinating responses to what Clara gathered was a territorial dispute with a rival organization. Giuseppe had been in and out of the office constantly. Other men Clara didn't know arrived for brief, intense meetings, and the whole villa vibrated with barely contained violence. "Go to your room early tonight," Victor told Clara at 6 o'clock. "Lock the door. Don't come out until morning regardless of what you hear." "What's happening?" "Nothing that concerns you. Just do as I say." His tone left no room for argument. Clara retreated to her room, locked the door as instructed, and tried to focus on anything other than the tension thrumming through the villa. She couldn't concentrate on reading, couldn't bear to watch television, just paced and worried and listened to occasional sounds from below. Cars arriving, voices raised and then silenced, footsteps in hallways. At midnight, an explosion shook the building. Clara hit the floor on instinct, heart hammering, ears ringing from the blast. Glass shattered somewhere, multiple windows from the sound of it. Alarms screamed, shouts erupted from all directions. Another explosion closer this time. The villa was under attack. Clara crawled to the window, staying low, and peered out. The gardens were lit by fires burning in multiple locations. She could see figures moving in the darkness, armed men, too many to count, advancing toward the villa with military precision. Gunfire erupted. Not the single shot she'd heard in Victor's office months ago, but sustained automatic weapons fire that tore through the night. Clara pressed herself against the wall, terror overriding rational thought. She should hide in the bathroom, should get away from the windows, should... Her door burst open. Giuseppe stood in the hallway, blood on his face, gun in his hand. "Come with me. Now." "What's happening?" "Rivals. They're hitting the villa directly." He grabbed her arm, pulled her into the hallway. "Mr. Romano's orders. Get you to the safe room." They ran through corridors Clara had never seen before, Giuseppe half dragging her when she stumbled, moving with lethal efficiency past rooms where other security personnel were taking defensive positions. Another explosion rocked the villa. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. Giuseppe shoved Clara through a door that looked like ordinary wood paneling but was actually reinforced steel. Inside was a room maybe 12 feet square, concrete walls, emergency supplies, a communications console, and Victor barking orders into a phone while blood ran from a cut above his eye. He looked up as Giuseppe pushed Clara inside. "Secure the door. No one gets through." Giuseppe nodded and disappeared back into the chaos. The door locked with multiple mechanical sounds. Bolts engaging, seals activating. Suddenly the gunfire was muted, distant, filtered through layers of protection. Clara stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. Victor ended his call and turned his full attention to her. "Are you hurt?" "No, Victor, what's happening? Who's attacking?" "The Calabrese family. Retribution for the man I killed in my office. Apparently he was more important than my intelligence suggested." Victor moved to the communications console, began cycling through camera feeds showing different parts of the villa under siege. "They want me dead. They're willing to burn down everything I've built to make it happen." Clara watched the screens, horrified. The beautiful villa was being torn apart by explosives and gunfire. Men were dying, both attackers and Victor's security forces, their bodies visible in the camera feeds. The reality of Victor's world, usually hidden behind administrative work and careful euphemisms, was laid bare in real-time violence. "How long can we last in here?" Clara asked. "Days if necessary, but I've called in reinforcements. This will be over in an hour, maybe 2. Victor's voice was calm, controlled, completely at odds with the destruction visible on the screens. "They made a tactical error attacking my headquarters directly. It gives me legal justification for whatever response I choose. Legal justification, Clara repeated numbly. For what? For ending the Calabrese family's operation in Naples, permanently. Victor pulled a gun from a hidden compartment in the wall, checked it with practiced efficiency. They wanted war. They'll get extermination. The coldness in his voice should have terrified Clara, should have reminded her exactly what kind of man she'd spent 7 months working for. Instead, she found herself moving closer, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. You're bleeding, she said quietly. Victor touched his forehead, seemed surprised to see blood on his fingers. It's nothing. Head wounds bleed excessively even when minor. Clara found the first aid kit mounted on the wall, pulled out gauze. Sit down. Let me clean it. We're under siege and you want to play nurse? We're locked in a safe room with nothing to do but wait. Sit down. Victor sat. Clara approached carefully, began cleaning the cut above his eye with gentle efficiency. They were close now, closer than they'd been since the day she'd tended his shoulder, and Clara could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell gunpowder and smoke, and the cologne he always wore. Why did you have Giuseppe bring me here? She asked quietly. You could have left me in my room. The safe room is for you, not your employees. You're not just an employee anymore. Victor's dark eyes fixed on her face. Haven't been for months, you know that. I don't know anything anymore. Clara pressed gauze against the cut and Victor hissed slightly. Sorry. Don't apologize, it's necessary. His hand came up, caught her wrist gently. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her first name, the sound of it in his voice. Low, rough, intimate, sent electricity through her. Don't, she whispered, though she didn't pull away. Don't what? Don't acknowledge what's been building between us for months? Don't admit that you matter to me beyond your administrative value. Victor's grip on her wrist tightened fractionally. I'm many things, Clara. A criminal, a killer, a man who's made choices you find abhorrent, but I'm not a liar. Not about this. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. You threatened my family. You forced me into servitude. You can't just... This doesn't change that. No, nothing changes what I did or why I did it. I needed leverage and you were available. That was business. Victor's thumb stroked along her pulse point, and Clara felt her breath catch. But business ended weeks ago, maybe months ago. What exists now is something else entirely. This is insane. We're trapped in a safe room while people die outside and you're... Victor stood abruptly, close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I'm telling you the truth before one of us dies tonight, because that's possible. Because those men outside want to kill me, and if they breach this room, they'll kill you too, just for being here. His free hand came up to cup her face. So yes, Clara, right now, while we might not have tomorrow, I'm telling you that you matter. That somewhere between filing reports and managing schedules and cleaning my blood off your hands, you became important. Clara should have pushed him away. Should have reminded him, reminded herself, of all the reasons this was impossible. But the truth was, she'd been fighting this for weeks. The way her pulse jumped when Victor praised her work, the relief she'd felt when he survived the shooting, the slow, terrifying realization that she'd started seeing him not as her captor, but as something dangerously close to a partner. I hate you, she whispered, but it sounded like a lie even to her own ears. I know. Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone. Hate me if you need to. But answer one question honestly. If I offered you freedom right now, truly offered it with no strings attached, would you take it? Or would you stay? Clara closed her eyes, unable to face the answer she could feel crystallizing in her chest. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Answer anyway. The safe room's walls muted the sounds of battle outside. In the enclosed space, Clara could hear Victor's breathing, steady and controlled despite everything, could feel the heat of him, the solid reality of his presence. 7 months ago, this man had destroyed her life with a single word. 7 months ago, she would have given anything to escape him. Now, I would stay, Clara heard herself say, the words wrenched from somewhere deep and honest. Not because of the debt, not because you're forcing me, but because leaving would mean going back to being invisible. And I can't do that anymore. Victor's expression transformed. Not a smile exactly, but something raw and genuine that Clara had never seen before. Then stay. When this is over, when the debt is paid, stay because you choose to. Stay because you belong here as much as I do. I don't belong in your world. You've been living in it for 7 months. You've been excelling in it. The only difference between us is that I accepted what I am years ago, and you're still fighting it. Victor's hand slid into her hair. Stop fighting, Clara. Just for tonight. Let yourself want what you want. Clara's resistance crumbled like a sandcastle against the tide. She'd been so careful for so long, maintaining professional distance, pretending the growing connection between them was one-sided or imagined or anything other than the truth currently burning through her veins. But the truth was unavoidable now, laid bare by crisis and proximity, and Victor's dark eyes seeing straight through every defense she'd built. She wanted him. Had wanted him for weeks, maybe longer. Wanted the dangerous intelligence behind those eyes. Wanted the competence and control he wielded like weapons. Wanted the man who'd sent money to his killer's family and locked her in a safe room to protect her from violence she'd never asked to be part of. It was twisted and wrong and utterly consuming. "This doesn't fix anything," Clara said, her voice breaking. "You still took everything from me." "Yes, and you took something from me without realizing it." Victor's forehead touched hers. "My certainty. My control. The careful distance I maintained from everyone in my life. You destroyed all of it just by being competent and brave and refusing to break." The confession felt more dangerous than anything Clara had witnessed in 7 months. More dangerous than guns and explosions and men dying in gardens. Because this was real, genuine emotion from a man who'd built an empire on never showing weakness. Clara made a choice. Probably the worst choice she'd ever made, or possibly the most honest. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. Victor responded instantly, his arms coming around her like he'd been waiting for permission, like he'd been holding back for months and finally didn't have to anymore. The kiss was nothing gentle. It was heat and hunger and 7 months of tension finally breaking, and Clara lost herself in it completely. They broke apart only when breathing became necessary. Victor's pupils were blown wide, his control visibly fraying. "Clara, don't talk," she whispered. "Don't rationalize or explain or try to make this make sense. Just—" He kissed her again, and rational thought dissolved. They were trapped in a safe room while Victor's empire burned outside, and none of it mattered because Clara had finally stopped lying to herself about what she wanted. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the dark connection they'd forged through debt and work and shared secrets. It was madness. It was inevitable. It was the only honest thing that had happened since Thomas died, and Victor Romano walked into her life with destruction in his wake. The battle outside continued. Reinforcements arrived. Clara heard Victor's phone buzzing with updates he ignored. The siege ended not with a dramatic finale, but with a gradual quieting of gunfire, a return to tense silence. An hour passed, maybe more. Clara lost track of time in the safe room's isolation, lost track of everything except Victor's hands and mouth, and the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in a world trying to kill him. Eventually, a knock came at the door. Giuseppe's voice calling through the reinforced steel. "Mr. Romano, the villa is secure. The Calabrese forces have retreated. We have casualties, but the threat is neutralized." Victor pulled away from Clara slowly, visibly forcing himself back into the controlled mask he wore for the world. He pressed the intercom. "Confirmed dead? 17 hostiles, ours, hostels. 3 of ours. Building damage is extensive but contained to the east wing and gardens. Dr. Marchesi is treating the wounded." "Good. I'll be out in 5 minutes. Secure the perimeter and prepare a full report." Victor released the intercom and turned back to Clara. She sat on the safe room's narrow bench, her lips swollen from kissing, her professional appearance thoroughly destroyed. Reality was flooding back, cold and uncomfortable. What did we just do? We acknowledged the truth. Victor straightened his clothes, wiped blood from his face, became the crime lord again in front of her eyes. "Nothing has to change, Clara. You can pretend this didn't happen if you need to." "Can you?" "No." The word was flat, final. "But I'll respect whatever boundary you need. This doesn't affect your contract. You can still leave when the debt is paid. I won't hold this against you." Clara stood, tried to smooth her hair, knew it was useless. "And if I don't want to leave?" Victor went very still. Then we'll discuss terms, real terms, between equals. But not tonight. Not while you're in shock and the villa is burning. He was giving her an out, acknowledging that crisis and proximity had created a moment that might not survive morning light. The maturity of it should have been reassuring. Instead, Clara felt something like disappointment. I meant what I said, she told him quietly, about staying, about not being able to go back to being invisible. I know, but you need to be certain. When your contract ends, when you're truly free to choose, ask me again then. If you still want this, want me, I'll give you everything I have. Victor moved to the door, began unlocking it. Until then, we work together. We survive together. And we don't discuss this again unless you initiate it. Agreed? Clara nodded, understanding that Victor was protecting her from making choices under duress. The same duress he'd created months ago was now something he refused to exploit for personal gain. The contradiction made her head spin. The door opened. Giuseppe waited outside, his expression carefully neutral despite surely knowing what had been happening in the locked safe room. Mrs. DeLuca, your quarters are intact. I can escort you there if you wish. Clara looked at Victor one last time. His face had returned to its usual controlled mask, but his eyes held promises and questions and a vulnerability she'd never expected to see. Yes, she told Giuseppe. Please. She walked through the damaged villa, past rooms with shattered windows and bullet-scarred walls, past security personnel tending wounds and coordinating cleanup, past evidence of the violence that was part of Victor's daily reality. The East Wing was destroyed. The beautiful gardens were scorched and cratered. 3 men had died defending this place, and Clara had spent the siege kissing the man they'd died to protect. The wrongness of it should have crushed her, should have sent her running despite the contract, despite the consequences. But when Clara reached her miraculously intact room and locked the door behind her, the only thing she felt was a fierce, terrible clarity. She belonged to this world now, not because Victor had forced her into it, but because something in her had recognized itself in the chaos and danger and moral complexity. The ordinary life she'd lived before seemed impossibly distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Clara looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, disheveled, lips bruised from kissing a criminal, eyes bright with something that looked dangerously close to happiness, and barely recognized herself. But maybe that was the point. Maybe this was who she'd always been beneath the careful facade of normalcy. Maybe it had taken Thomas's death and Victor's debt and 7 months in a beautiful cage to reveal the truth. She was stronger than she'd known, braver than she'd imagined, capable of surviving in a world that would have destroyed the woman she used to be. And she was falling for the man who dragged her into that world, which was either the worst mistake she'd ever make or the most honest thing she'd ever admitted. Time would tell which. But Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that when her contract ended and Victor offered her the choice to stay, she would say yes. Not because she had to, but because for the first time in her life she knew exactly where she belonged, even if that place was beside a monster, even if it meant embracing the darkness she'd discovered in herself, even if the price was everything she used to believe about right and wrong. Clara DeLuca had died at her husband's funeral. The woman who remained was someone new, someone dangerous, someone who could stand in the ashes of a siege and feel alive instead of afraid, someone who could choose Victor Romano's world and mean it. The debt would be paid in 5 more months, but the real question, the one that mattered, wasn't about money anymore. It was about who Clara would be when freedom came, and whether the woman she'd become could ever go back to pretending she was anything other than exactly what she was. The answer, Clara suspected, was already written in the space between her heartbeat and Victor's dark eyes, watching her across a safe room while the world burned outside. She would stay. When the time came, when the choice was truly hers, she would stay. And everything else would have to catch up to that truth. The morning after the siege arrived with deceptive normalcy. Clara woke to her usual breakfast delivery, dressed in clothes that somehow still looked professional, despite everything that had changed, and walked downstairs through a villa that bore the scars of last night's violence. Workers were already repairing damaged walls, replacing shattered windows, erasing evidence of the attack with efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. Victor's office had escaped major damage. Clara found him already at his desk, reviewing what looked like security reports, his face showing no sign of the intimacy they'd shared in the safe room. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment their eyes met, a conversation happening in silence that acknowledged everything and committed to nothing. "Good morning, Mrs. DeLuca," he said formally. "I trust you slept adequately despite the circumstances." The professional distance was deliberate, Clara understood. A boundary re-established in daylight, giving her space to process what had happened without pressure. She appreciated it even as part of her wanted to cross the room and continue what they'd started. "Well enough," Clara replied, moving to her desk. "What's the damage assessment?" "Extensive, but manageable." The Calabrese family made their statement. "Now, I'll make mine." Victor's voice held the cold certainty that had terrified Clara months ago, but now felt almost familiar. "Giuseppe is coordinating our response. By week's end, the Calabrese organization in Naples will cease to exist." Clara should have been horrified by the casual promise of destruction. Instead, she found herself asking practical questions. Will that create power vacuum issues? Other families moving in to claim territory? Victor's expression flickered with something that might have been approval. "Already anticipated. I've reached out to allies in Rome and Milan. The transition will be controlled, beneficial to all parties who matter." He paused. "You're thinking strategically, like someone who plans to be here long term." "I'm thinking like someone who spent 7 months learning how your world operates," Clara said carefully. "Whether that translates to long-term involvement remains to be seen." "Fair enough." Victor returned his attention to the reports. "For now, business continues. I need you to coordinate with Marco on the port acquisitions we discussed last month. The Calabrese attack delayed the timeline, but the opportunity window is still open if we move quickly." They fell into their usual rhythm: work requests and confirmations, schedules coordinated, information flowing between them with the practiced efficiency of 7 months collaboration. To any observer, nothing had changed. But Clara felt the difference in every interaction, every moment their eyes met across the office, every careful maintenance of professional distance that barely concealed the truth underneath. Something fundamental had shifted. They both knew it. They were both choosing not to address it yet. The day passed in controlled chaos. Victor conducted damage control with his various operations, Clara managed the logistics of rebuilding and business continuity, and the villa slowly returned to functionality around them. By evening, the worst of the physical damage was contained, temporary repairs in place, permanent reconstruction scheduled. As Clara prepared to leave for the night, Victor called her name. She turned, found him standing from his desk with an expression that looked almost uncertain, an unfamiliar vulnerability that made her heart catch. "Walk with me," he said. "Please." It wasn't an order, it was a request, and the difference mattered. Clara nodded. They walked through the villa's restored hallways in silence, out into gardens that still bore scorch marks and crater damage, but were already being tended by groundskeepers working under floodlights. The evening air was warm, fragrant with flowers that had survived the siege. "I meant what I said last night," Victor said finally, stopping near a fountain that had somehow escaped damage. "About you mattering, about wanting you to stay when the contract ends. But I need you to understand what that would mean." Clara waited, letting him work through whatever he needed to say. "This life, my life, it's dangerous. Last night proved that. There will always be people who want to hurt me, and anyone close to me becomes a target." Victor's jaw tightened. "If you stay, if we pursue what started in that safe room, you accept that risk. You accept living with security details and panic rooms and the possibility that someday someone might succeed where the Calabrese family failed." "I know," Clara said quietly. "Do you? Really?" Victor turned to face her fully. "You've been protected here, isolated from the worst of it. But staying voluntarily, becoming my partner in truth, that's different. That's choosing to live in the crosshairs permanently." "You live there," Clara pointed out. "Why should I be more afraid than you are?" "Because I've made peace with it. I've accepted that this life might end violently, but you—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with words. "You didn't choose this initially. It was forced on you. I need to know you understand the difference between adaptation and genuine choice." Clara moved closer, close enough to see the genuine concern in Victor's dark eyes. This wasn't manipulation or strategy. This was a man trying to protect someone he cared about, even if that meant protecting her from himself. Victor, she said, using his first name deliberately. I've had 7 months to understand exactly what your world entails. I've covered up murder. I've managed criminal logistics. I've survived a siege and treated your wounds and learned to read the patterns in violence. You're not revealing anything I haven't already lived. But you were trapped, serving a debt. At first, yes, but somewhere along the way, probably weeks ago, if I'm honest, I stopped feeling trapped. I started feeling competent, valued, like I was finally using my mind for something that mattered instead of teaching multiplication tables to bored children. Clara held his gaze. The debt is almost paid. Another 5 months and I could walk away free. But I already know I won't. Not because you forced anything, but because leaving would mean giving up the only place I've ever felt like I belonged. Victor's hand came up to cup her face, the gesture achingly gentle. You belong in safety, Clara. In normalcy. In a life where men don't attack your home with explosives. I belonged in that life, Clara corrected. Past tense. That woman died with her husband. What's left doesn't fit in normal anymore. She leaned into his touch. I'm not afraid of your world, Victor. I'm afraid of going back to pretending I'm someone I'm not. Then you're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most damaged. Maybe both. Clara smiled without humor. Thomas's lies damaged me. Your debt enslaved me. But somewhere in the wreckage, I found something real, something honest, and I'm not willing to give that up just because it comes wrapped in danger. Victor kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. If you stay, he said quietly, I can't promise safety. Can't promise conventional happiness. Can't promise anything except honesty and partnership and whatever protection I can provide. That's more than Thomas ever gave me, more than my old life ever offered. Claire's hands found his chest, felt his heartbeat steady beneath her palms. I'm not asking for safety, Victor. I'm asking for truth. For a life where I matter. For work that challenges me and a partner who sees me as an equal instead of an accessory. You'd have all of that. You already do. Victor's arms tightened around her. But the contract still has 5 months remaining. Are you certain you can wait that long? Certain you won't change your mind when the debt is truly paid and freedom is real instead of theoretical? Clara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Let me propose something. When the debt hits 0, give me that choice you mentioned. Truly free choice, no pressure, no manipulation. Ask me to stay. And I'll give you my answer then. One that comes from absolute freedom instead of any shadow of obligation. And until then? Until then, we work together. We rebuild after the siege. We finish what needs finishing. Clara hesitated, then added more softly, and we figure out what this is between us without the debt complicating it. No more safe room confessions under siege conditions, just slow honesty. If it's real, it'll survive 5 months of patience. Victor studied her face like he was memorizing it. You're asking me to wait, to give you space while the last of your obligation plays out. I'm asking for the same respect you showed last night, protection from making choices under duress, even if the duress is attraction instead of fear. Clara managed a small smile. You said you wanted equals. Equals get time to choose freely. You're right, and I hate that you're right. Victor released her reluctantly. 5 months then. We maintain professional boundaries. We finish your contract properly. And when the debt is paid, I ask and you answer with complete freedom. Agreed. They stood in the damaged garden, the agreement hanging between them like a promise and a challenge. 5 months of working together while something unnamed and powerful built in the spaces between professional interaction. 5 months of proving whether what they'd found in crisis could survive in calm. Clara thought it could, thought it already had, building slowly through shared work and mutual respect and the recognition of two people who saw each other clearly, despite every reason not to. But time would tell. And for once, Clara had time, had control, had choice. It felt like freedom. The next 5 months unfolded with a rhythm that was both familiar and entirely new. Clara continued her administrative work with the competence that had become second nature. She coordinated Victor's rebuilt security protocols, managed the complex logistics of absorbing Calabrese territories into Victor's organization, handled communications with increased authority as Victor's trust in her judgment grew absolute. The villa was restored room by room, the gardens replanted and redesigned with better defensive positions disguised as landscaping. New security personnel were hired, vetted with exhaustive thoroughness. Dr. Marchesi became a regular presence, treating minor injuries and providing medical oversight that suggested he was far more than a simple general practitioner. Clara's debt balance decreased steadily. 200,000 became 175, then 150, then 125. Each month brought her closer to freedom, and each month made that freedom feel less like escape and more like the beginning of something chosen. She and Victor maintained careful boundaries. Their interactions stayed professional. Meetings, reports, strategic discussions conducted with the formality of colleagues rather than the intimacy of what they'd shared in the safe room. But underneath ran a current of awareness, of anticipation, of mutual recognition that they were building toward something neither wanted to rush. Occasionally their hands would brush passing documents. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the office and hold a moment longer than necessary. Once, working late, Victor had reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind Clara's ear, the gesture so tender it had made her breath catch. But then he'd stepped back, returned to professional distance, honoring the agreement they'd made. It was torture. It was perfect. It gave Clara the space to be absolutely certain about what she wanted. She called her mother more regularly, the lies coming easier with practice. Called her sister too, reconnecting gradually, laying groundwork for the explanation she'd eventually have to give. She was alive. She was safe. She was becoming someone they wouldn't quite recognize, but would hopefully understand. Sophia noticed the changes, of course. "You walk differently now," she observed one afternoon. "Like you own space instead of apologizing for occupying it." "Is that good or bad?" Clara asked. "Neither, just true." Sophia's expression was unreadable. "Mr. Romano walks differently around you too, like he's careful of something fragile. I've worked for him 12 years and never seen him careful of anything." Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. But the observation stayed with her, adding to the growing certainty that what existed between her and Victor was real, visible even to outside observers despite their careful boundaries. The 4-month mark came and went, then 4.5. The debt balance dropped below 100,000 euros, then 75, then 50. Clara could see the finish line approaching, could feel the weight of choice crystallizing into something she'd have to voice soon. She was ready. Had been ready for months, really. But the waiting had value. It proved that her decision wasn't crisis-driven or pressure-induced. It was deliberate, considered, chosen with full understanding of consequences. 2 weeks before her contract's official end date, Victor called Clara into his office after hours. She found him standing at the window overlooking the restored gardens, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense in a way that suggested whatever he needed to discuss wasn't easy. "The debt balance will zero out next Friday," he said without preamble. "Giuseppe has prepared the final documentation. Once you sign, you're legally free of all obligations to me or my organization." "I know," Clara said quietly. "I wanted to discuss logistics before that happens. What you'll need for transition, whether you want help relocating, setting up new accounts, establishing yourself somewhere else. Whatever you choose, I'll provide resources to make it smooth." He was offering her everything practical while carefully not asking the question that mattered. Clara moved closer, stood beside him at the window. "What if I don't want to relocate?" she asked. Victor's jaw tightened. "Then we'd need to discuss alternative arrangements. But Clara, I need you to be certain. Once you stay voluntarily, there's no going back. Your family will ask questions. Your old life will become completely inaccessible. You'll be choosing this." He gestured at the villa, the city beyond, everything his world encompassed. "Permanently." "I've had 5 months to think about nothing else," Clara said. 5 months of working beside you, learning your world, understanding exactly what staying would mean. 5 months of choosing this every single day, even though the debt gave me an excuse to pretend I wasn't choosing. "And?" Victor turned to face her fully, his dark eyes searching hers. "What conclusion did you reach?" Clara took a breath. committed to the truth she'd been building toward for months. I reached the conclusion that I'm not the person who married Thomas DeLuca. That woman was content with invisibility and comfortable lies and a life that required nothing from her. She died in a cemetery when you said the word debt, and I realized everything I thought I knew was fiction. That doesn't answer my question. Yes, it does. Because the woman who's standing here now, the one who manages criminal logistics and survives sieges and finds competence in chaos, she doesn't belong anywhere except right here, beside you, in this world, making choices that matter instead of pretending safety exists somewhere if she just stays quiet enough. Victor's hand came up to cup her face, the touch achingly familiar despite months of restraint. You're certain, absolutely certain. More certain than I've ever been about anything. Clara leaned into his touch. I don't want relocation resources, Victor. I don't want help transitioning to normal life. I want the offer you made me months ago. The one about staying as a genuine partner instead of a debtor. If I make that offer now, it comes with conditions we haven't discussed. Personal conditions, not just professional ones. Such as? Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone. Such as acknowledging that what exists between us isn't employer-employee attraction. It's something deeper. Something that would make you a target for anyone who wants to hurt me. Something that would bind us together in ways that go far beyond business partnership. Clara's heart hammered. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that if you stay, I want all of you. Not just the administrative genius who runs my organization with more competence than I thought possible, but the woman who tended my wounds and kissed me in a safe room and challenged me to be honest when I was offering comfortable lies. Victor's voice dropped lower, rougher. I'm saying I want a partner in every sense. Someone who stands beside me, not behind me. Someone I trust with everything, my business, my life, my secrets, my vulnerabilities. That's... Clara's breath caught. That's not what I expected. What did you expect? An employment offer, decent salary, professional respect, maybe continued personal involvement on the side. Clara managed a shaky laugh. Not a declaration that sounds dangerously close to, love, Victor finished. Is that what you hear? Is that what you mean? Victor pulled her closer, close enough that Clara could feel his heartbeat, could see the vulnerability in his eyes that he'd shown only once before in the safe room during the siege. I mean that I've built empires and destroyed rivals and controlled more territory than most men dream of. But none of it felt like winning until you walked into my office every morning and made chaos into order with nothing but intelligence and determination. I mean that you terrify me because you're the only person alive who could truly destroy me, not through violence, but by choosing to leave. I mean, he paused, seemed to struggle with words. I mean that yes, Clara, what I feel for you is love, even though I didn't think I was capable of it anymore. Clara's vision blurred. She'd prepared herself for attraction, for partnership, for professional respect evolving into personal connection. But this, Victor Romano, ruthless crime lord, admitting love with the same unflinching honesty he brought to everything else, this she hadn't anticipated. You can't love me, she whispered. You threatened my family. You forced me into servitude. You built this entire relationship on coercion and debt. Yes. And you should hate me for all of it. You should take your freedom next Friday and disappear to somewhere I'll never find you. Victor's arms tightened around her. But you won't. Because somewhere in the wreckage I created, we found something real, something that grew despite every reason it shouldn't, and I hope, you feel it too. Clara did. Had felt it building for months, had fought against it and surrendered to it in equal measure. Had learned to stop questioning why her heart responded to the man who'd destroyed her old life and given her a new one. I do, she admitted. I feel it. I hate that I feel it, and I can't imagine not feeling it anymore. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But Victor, if I stay, if we do this, it has to be as equals. Not master and servant, not captor and captive. Partners in truth. Agreed. Which means you get equal say in decisions, equal authority in the organization, equal everything. Victor's expression was fierce. I don't want an assistant who happens to share my bed, Clara. I want a partner who challenges me, who calls me on my mistakes, who makes this empire stronger because her mind is as sharp as mine. That's a lot of responsibility. You've been handling it for months already. Making it official just acknowledges reality. Clara felt something settle into place, the last piece of certainty she'd needed. Then, yes, when the contract ends, when I sign those papers Giuseppe prepared, I'm staying, not as an employee, as your partner, in every sense you just described. Victor kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of the want they'd been restraining for 5 months. Clara surrendered to it completely, letting herself fall into the connection they'd been building through careful distance and professional boundaries and mutual honoring of her need for free choice. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Next Friday can't come soon enough. We've waited 5 months. We can wait 1 more week. Barely. Victor's hands mapped her spine, her shoulders, her face, like he was memorizing her through touch. I want to do this right, Clara. I want you to sign those freedom papers and walk away from the debt with absolutely no obligation. Then I want to ask you properly. No pressure, no coercion, just an honest offer between equals. And I'll give you an honest answer. Clara smiled against his mouth. Though you already know what it'll be. Say it anyway. When the time comes, I need to hear it without any shadow of debt between us. Then you'll hear it. Clara pulled back reluctantly. But for now, we should probably maintain some boundaries. 1 more week of professionalism before we completely destroy the employer-employee fiction. Victor groaned. You're cruel. I'm careful. There's a difference. Clara straightened her clothes, tried to restore some semblance of professional appearance. Besides, anticipation makes things better, or drives people insane. That too. Clara moved toward the door, paused to look back. For what it's worth, Victor, I love you too. Have for weeks, probably. Maybe longer. I just needed time to be sure it was real and not some twisted version of Stockholm Syndrome. Victor's expression transformed, raw emotion breaking through the controlled mask in a way that made Clara's chest tight. And you're sure now? Completely. The debt forced proximity, but what grew from that proximity, that's real. That's chosen. That's worth building a life on. She left before Victor could respond, before they could tumble into the intimacy they'd been restraining for months. 1 more week, 7 days of professional distance while Clara's contract wound to its conclusion and freedom became real. Then she'd make her choice official, and everything would change. The final week passed with agonizing slowness and surprising speed simultaneously. Clara worked with fierce focus, tying up loose ends, ensuring all her projects were documented properly, preparing the organization to function with her as a permanent fixture rather than a temporary debtor. She coordinated with Marco on final port acquisition details, worked with Giuseppe on new security protocols, reviewed financial reports with Victor's accountants that showed the empire expanding into territories previously held by the Calabrese family. Everything she'd helped build over 7.5 months was consolidating into something formidable, a criminal organization that functioned with corporate efficiency and strategic brilliance. Clara's fingerprints were all over it, for better or worse. She'd stopped feeling guilty about that months ago. Friday arrived with deceptive calm. Giuseppe delivered the final contract documents to Clara's desk at 9 in the morning. She read through them carefully. Legal language confirming all debts paid in full, all obligations satisfied, all agreements between Clara De Luca and Victor Romano dissolved completely. Her signature would make her a free woman with no legal ties to Victor or his organization. It should have felt momentous. Instead, it felt like paperwork, necessary but ultimately meaningless compared to the choice that would follow. Clara signed at precisely 10 o'clock, with Victor watching from across the office. Their eyes met as she set down the pen, and something electric passed between them. "It's done," she said quietly. "The debt is paid." Victor stood, came around his desk with deliberate slowness. "Then we're done with coercion, done with obligation, done with anything except honest choice." "Yes." He stopped in front of her, and Clara saw vulnerability and certainty warring in his dark eyes. "Clara De Luca, will you stay? Not as my employee or my debtor or anything you're forced to be, but as my partner, my equal. The person I trust with everything I am and everything I've built." Clara took his hands, felt the strength in them, the scars he'd earned building an empire that would have destroyed weaker men. Yes, I'll stay, because this is where I belong now. Not because you forced me here, but because I chose it. Every day for months I chose it, and I'll keep choosing it for as long as you'll have me. Victor's kiss was gentle this time, reverent, like he was sealing a promise that mattered more than any contract they'd signed. When they pulled apart, his smile was genuine, the first real smile Clara had seen from him in 7.5 months. Then we have logistics to discuss, he said. Moving you into the main villa, changing your status in the organization, making it clear to everyone who works for me that you're not staff. You're my partner in every sense. Will that cause problems? Probably. Some of the old guard won't like answering to a woman who started as a debtor, but they'll adapt or find employment elsewhere. Victor's expression hardened slightly. You've earned your place here, Clara. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth keeping. Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not just love, but respect, recognition. The validation she'd been seeking her entire life without realizing it. What about my family? My mother will eventually ask questions I can't answer with comfortable lies. Tell her the truth. As much of it as she can handle, anyway. Victor guided Clara to the couch against the wall, sat beside her. Tell her your husband left debts. Tell her you found work to resolve them. Tell her you've built a new life in Naples and you're happy. The details can stay vague. And if she wants to visit, then she visits. We create appropriate cover stories. You introduce me as your employer if that's easier initially. Over time, the truth evolves naturally. Victor took her hand. I won't ask you to cut off your family, Clara. That's not partnership, that's isolation. We'll figure out how to maintain those relationships while protecting them from the more dangerous aspects of my world. The consideration, the genuine care for preserving Clara's connections to her old life, made her eyes burn. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else for months. How to make this work. How to give you everything you deserve without destroying what matters to you. Victor's thumb traced patterns on her palm. You're not the only one who's been preparing for this choice, Clara. I've been building toward it too. Clara leaned into him, let herself rest against his shoulder with the ease of someone who'd finally found home. So what happens now? We just continue? Work together? Live together? Build this empire into something even more impressive? Essentially, yes, though I should probably make one thing clear. Victor shifted to look at her directly. This isn't temporary. What I'm offering, what I'm asking for, it's permanent. I don't do casual relationships, Clara. If you're staying for real, building a life, not just passing time. The intensity should have been overwhelming. Instead, Clara felt certainty crystallize into something diamond hard and unbreakable. Good, because I don't do casual either. When I commit completely. Even to a criminal, even knowing what I am and what I've done. Especially to you, because you're the first person who ever saw me clearly, not as someone's wife or a teacher or a convenient servant, but as myself, capable and strong and worth trusting with real responsibility. Clara cupped his face. You destroyed my old life, Victor, but you gave me a real one in exchange. That's worth more than comfortable normalcy ever was. Victor kissed her again, deeper this time, and Clara felt 7.5 months of restraint finally breaking into something honest and mutual and chosen. They had time now. Had freedom. Had the certainty that came from choosing each other with eyes wide open and understanding complete. When they finally pulled apart, Victor smiled with something that looked like relief. I should probably warn you, partnership in my world comes with expectations. You'll need security training. You'll need to learn to handle weapons. You'll need to understand defensive protocols beyond what you've picked up passively. Because I'm a target now, Shem, Clara said. Because you're important. And important people in my world need to be able to protect themselves. Victor stood, pulled her up with him. But that's logistics for another day. Right now I want to show you the rest of the villa. The parts you haven't seen because they were private. Clara let him lead her through the villa, through rooms she'd never been allowed to enter. Victor's private quarters, his personal study, the library that held first editions worth more than Clara's former apartment, the rooftop terrace with views that stretched across all of Naples. Each space was revealed like a gift, like Victor opening parts of his life that had been locked away from everyone. They ended in his bedroom, all dark wood and expensive linens and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Clara had imagined this room during long nights in her guest quarters, had wondered what it looked like, whether she'd ever see it as anything other than forbidden territory. Now she stood in the doorway while Victor watched her with an expression that mixed want and patience and a question he wasn't quite asking. "Is this moving too fast?" he asked quietly. "We don't have to. I can wait as long as you need." Clara shook her head. "We've been moving toward this for 7.5 months. That's not fast, that's inevitable." She stepped into the room, into Victor's space, claiming it as hers now too. "Besides, I'm done waiting. Done with restraint and boundaries and pretending I don't want exactly this." Victor's control shattered. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulled Clara against him with a hunger that had been building for months. They tumbled into honest want without the weight of debt or obligation or anything except mutual choice and the connection they'd forged through impossible circumstances. Later, much later, they lay tangled together while evening light painted the room in gold and shadow. Clara traced the scar on Victor's shoulder from the shooting months ago, thought about how far they'd both traveled since that day. "What are you thinking?" Victor asked, his voice rough with satisfaction. "That I should probably feel guilty. That I should be questioning my choices or mourning my old life or something appropriately conflicted." Clara propped herself on one elbow to look at him properly. "But I don't feel any of that. I just feel right. Like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." "No regrets?" "Not one." Clara kissed him softly. "Thomas's debts brought me here. Your coercion kept me here. But I'm staying because I choose to, because you see me and value me and challenge me to be better than I knew I could be. That's worth more than safety ever was." Victor pulled her closer, buried his face in her hair. "I love you, Clara DeLuca. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. You terrify me and amaze me in equal measure." "Good. Partners should terrify each other a little. Keeps things interesting." They stayed like that as night fell over Naples. 2 people who'd found each other through destruction and debt and impossible circumstances, building something honest from the wreckage of everything that came before. The next morning, Clara moved her belongings from the guest wing to Victor's quarters. It didn't take long. She still owned almost nothing, still lived simply despite the luxury surrounding her. But the symbolic importance of the move resonated through the villa. Staff who'd seen her as a temporary debtor now recognized her as something permanent. Giuseppe nodded with what might have been approval. Sophia's expression remained neutral, but she coordinated the move with efficiency that suggested acceptance, if not quite blessing. Clara settled into her new reality with the same competence she'd brought to everything else. She learned the villa's private spaces, learned Victor's personal routines, learned how to be partner instead of employee without losing the professional respect they'd built. Her mother called that afternoon. Clara answered with her heart hammering, knowing this conversation would shape how her 2 worlds connected going forward. "Clara, darling, I'm worried about you. It's been almost 8 months since Thomas died, and you're still in Naples, still claiming you need space. When are you coming home?" Clara looked out the window at the gardens she'd watched burn and be rebuilt, felt Victor's presence in the next room like an anchor. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I'm not coming home, at least not permanently." Silence. Then her mother's voice, worried and confused. "What do you mean? Your life is here, your family, your friends. My old life was here. But I've built a new one in Naples, a better one, actually." Clara took a breath. "Thomas left debts, Mom. Significant debts that I've been working to resolve. I found employment that allowed me to pay them off, while also discovering that I'm good at things I never knew I could do. And I've met someone who values me in ways Thomas never did." Another pause. Clara could almost hear her mother processing, trying to reconcile this information with the daughter she thought she knew. "Debts? What kind of debts? And who is this person?" "The kind that required serious work to resolve. But they're paid now, and I'm free to make my own choices. The person is—" Clara smiled despite her nerves. "His name is Victor. He's a businessman in Naples. Wealthy, powerful, and completely honest about who he is." He sees me as an equal, Mom, as a partner. That's something I never had before. Clara, this sounds... You barely know this man. And debts from Thomas? Why didn't you tell me? We could have helped. Because it wasn't your burden to carry. It was mine, and I handled it. Clara kept her voice gentle but firm. I know this is sudden. I know you're worried. But I need you to trust that I'm making choices that are right for me, that I'm happy in a way I never was before. Her mother sighed, and Clara heard the reluctant acceptance in it. You sound different, stronger, maybe. More certain. I am different. The past 8 months changed me fundamentally. But it's good change, Mom, I promise. They talked for another 20 minutes, Clara carefully editing the truth into something her mother could accept. Yes, she had a good job. Yes, Victor treated her well. Yes, she was safe and happy and building a real future. The parts about criminal empires and sieges and the fact that she'd been essentially enslaved for 7 months, those stayed carefully hidden. Some truths were protection, not deception. When Clara ended the call, she found Victor in the doorway, having clearly heard at least her side of the conversation. How did it go? He asked. As well as could be expected, she's worried but accepting. She'll want to meet you eventually. Then she'll meet me. We'll arrange something appropriate. Victor crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. I meant what I said, Clara. I won't make you choose between me and your family. We'll find ways to maintain both. I know, that's part of why I love you. Clara rested her head against his chest. You could have insisted I cut all ties. Instead, you're helping me preserve what matters while building something new. Because partnership means protecting what you value, not demanding you sacrifice it. They stood like that for a long moment, Clara feeling the steady beat of Victor's heart, knowing this was real and chosen and worth every impossible choice that had led her here. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Clara worked beside Victor with official authority now. Her title changed from assistant to executive partner. She attended meetings as his equal, made strategic decisions that affected the entire organization, earned respect from men who'd initially dismissed her as temporary. Some pushed back. A few of Victor's older associates questioned whether someone who'd started as a debtor should have real power. Victor handled those challenges with ruthless efficiency. Accept Clara's authority or find employment elsewhere. Within a month, everyone who mattered understood that crossing Clara meant crossing Victor, and no one wanted that. Clara proved herself through competence and strategic brilliance. She reorganized the port operations for maximum efficiency, brokered an alliance with a Milan family that expanded their influence north, identified security vulnerabilities that had existed for years. She was good at this work, exceptional, even, and everyone knew it. The villa became home in truth. Clara and Victor fell into domestic rhythms that balanced their professional partnership. Mornings spent reviewing strategy over coffee, evenings where they could just be together without the weight of empire building. They traveled occasionally, always with heavy security, to other cities where Victor's influence extended. Clara met his contacts, learned the broader network, established herself as partner rather than accessory. She underwent security training as promised, learned to shoot with accuracy that surprised her, learned defensive techniques, learned to read situations for danger. Giuseppe conducted most of the training with professional detachment, and Clara suspected he respected her more for taking it seriously rather than assuming Victor's protection was sufficient. You're getting good, Giuseppe commented after Clara successfully disarmed him during a training session 3 months after her contract ended. Natural instincts, once you trust them. I've learned to trust a lot of things I never thought I would, Clara said, returning his weapon. Giuseppe's expression flickered with something that might have been approval. Mr. Romano chose well. Not many people could handle this transition. Survive it, yes, but thrive in it? That takes strength most don't have. The acknowledgement meant more than Clara expected. Giuseppe had watched her journey from terrified debtor to competent partner, had probably questioned whether she'd survive at all. His respect felt earned, legitimate. 6 months after the contract ended, Clara and Victor hosted a dinner for his key associates, a formal event that served dual purposes of business coordination and public declaration of Clara's permanent status. She wore a dress Victor had chosen, elegant and expensive, and stood beside him as equals while men who controlled territories across southern Italy acknowledged her authority. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Clara felt powerful, competent, like she'd finally found the space where she belonged. During the dinner, Marco approached her with a question about shipping schedules. They discussed logistics for 10 minutes, Clara providing solutions that Marco accepted with professional respect. When he walked away, Victor leaned close. "You're magnificent," he murmured. "Watching you command respect from men who've been in this business for decades, it's better than I imagined." "You imagined this?" Clara asked. "Since the day you signed the contract, maybe before. I saw potential in you that you didn't see in yourself." Victor's hand found hers under the table. "I'm glad you stayed long enough to discover it too." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of that statement settle into her bones. She had discovered potential she'd never known existed, had become someone stronger, sharper, more capable than the woman who'd stood at her husband's funeral 8 months ago. That woman was gone completely now. What remained was someone who could navigate criminal empires with the same competence she'd once brought to organizing classroom supplies. Someone who could love a dangerous man and build a life in shadows without losing herself in the process. Someone who'd chosen her fate freely and lived with the consequences without regret. The dinner ended late. Guests departed with promises of continued alliance and profitable ventures. Clara and Victor stood on the rooftop terrace afterward, looking out over Naples spread below them like a kingdom they ruled together. "Do you ever miss it?" Victor asked quietly. "Your old life. The simplicity." Clara considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss not knowing how dark the world can be. But I don't miss being blind to my own strength. I don't miss settling for comfortable mediocrity." She turned to face him. "Thomas's death destroyed my comfortable life. Your debt enslaved me. But somewhere in that destruction, I found the courage to become who I actually am, instead of who I thought I should be. I can't regret that." "Even knowing what it cost? What you had to do? What you had to accept?" "Even knowing all of it." Clara reached up to cup his face. "I love you, Victor Romano. Not despite what you are, but including it. You're a criminal and a killer, and someone who built power on fear and violence. But you're also the first person who ever saw me clearly and valued what you saw. That matters more than moral purity ever could." Victor kissed her deeply, and Clara tasted the promise in it. Years stretching ahead, challenges they'd face together, an empire they'd build side by side. It wasn't the fairy tale ending she'd imagined as a young woman. It was better. It was real. They stood together on the terrace while Naples glittered below them. Two people who'd found each other through impossible circumstances and chosen to stay through honest recognition of what they'd become together. The debt that had brought them together was long paid. What remained was partnership forged in fire, tested through crisis, proven through mutual choice. Clara De Luca had walked into Victor Romano's office as collateral for her dead husband's debts. She'd survived servitude, covered up murder, learned to navigate a criminal world she'd never known existed. She'd transformed from invisible wife to indispensable partner, from victim to equal, from prisoner to someone who chose her cage and made it a kingdom. The journey had cost her everything she'd been, but it had given her everything she was capable of becoming. And standing beside Victor in the darkness above Naples, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choices again, would sign the same contract, survive the same trials, choose the same man and the same dangerous life. Because this partnership built on honesty and respect and mutual recognition was worth more than safety had ever been. The debt was paid, the cage was opened, and Clara chose to stay, not because she had to, but because leaving would mean abandoning the only place she'd ever truly belonged. In Victor's world, in Victor's arms, in a life she'd built with her own strength from the wreckage of everything that came before. She was home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home. And that was worth everything it had cost to find it.